Chapter 650. A spectacular cooking competition was an interesting interlude to the evening banquet. With City Lord Michael and President Jeffrey present, the shop that Spatch had promised naturally belonged to Meg. Apart from getting a shop, being noticed by the core circle of Chaos City's business circle was also a huge gain for Meg. Meg was undoubtedly the biggest winner of the evening banquet. However, all of the merchants who wanted to forge a better relationship with Meg all stopped in their tracks when they saw Meg making his way toward the VIP seats on the side of the hill. Compared to the beautiful and wealthy young Mistress Hill, all of them were middle-aged men with large bellies, so they clearly didn't have anything that could attract Meg's attention. However, the merchants didn't stop talking to each other because of Meg. The annual mid-year banquet was a gathering for all of the top merchants in Chaos City. Every year, many major deals were struck during the banquet, and countless opportunities could be found during the banquet. All of the men were busy looking for opportunities to brag about how much their net worth had increased in the past 6 months. Meanwhile, the women began to form small cliques, inadvertently showing off which master had made the gemstone rings on their fingers, how much they had paid, or how much they had pulled in order to secure them, thereby drawing envious glances from the crowd. This was a topic that never went out of style among women, especially women like them who only had to think about how to spend money every day. Miss Gloria's dress is so beautiful. It accentuates her figure and her skin so well. Indeed, I feel like I'm a celestial maiden in that dress. If I could also get one custom-made, my husband would definitely be unable to take his eyes off of it. I wonder which master in Chaos City designed such a beautiful dress. Why haven't I heard anything about it? Of course, most of the attention was focused on Gloria, who was standing at the center of a group of women. She looked as if she had walked out of a painting, and her blue dress was glowing with a dazzling light, making her the center of everyone's attention. Gloria was a very prestigious woman, and the origin of her dress was even more of a source of intrigue for all of the women present. They wanted nothing more than to ask her which master tailor had made that dress so that they could get one custom-made before other women. Gloria was a little nervous with her hands crossed in front of her lower abdomen, but she maintained a faint smile on her face as she spoke to the noblewomen in an elegant and peaceful manner. "Miss Gloria, your dress is so beautiful. If I may ask, which master tailor made it?" A woman with heavy makeup turned to Gloria with a smile on her face. As soon as that was said, all of the voices around them became a lot softer. All of the women listened intently and subconsciously inched closer to Gloria. They were all holding their breaths in fear that they would miss out on a beautiful dress. Gloria's eyes lit up slightly, and her heart suddenly began to race. Everything she had done today was to attract attention to her dress. It appeared that her plan had been very successful. All of these wealthy noblewomen had already developed a strong interest in her dress. Gloria took a glance at the partitioned private room, and a confident smile appeared on her face as she shook her head and said, "This dress wasn't made by a master tailor. It was made by my blue suede." "Is Miss Gloria your own clothing store? Could it be that this dress was designed by Miss Gloria herself? If that's the case, then why would Miss Gloria sell such a beautiful dress? I'm sure every woman would want to own a dress like this, right?" All of the women began to whisper among themselves as soon as they heard Gloria's words. They had already planned to contact a master tailor through their connections, but they didn't expect this dress to be made by Gloria's own clothing store. "This dress is one of the dresses that Suede sells to the public. It's currently in the process of being made," Gloria said with a smile. All of the women's eyes lit up. This was great news. If they could buy something with money, then it wouldn't be a problem. However, Suede doesn't provide customization services. They do provide a selection of dresses of different sizes. Also, only one dress of each color will be produced, so there won't be any clashing, Gloria continued. "If it can't be custom-made, then it won't fit? If only one dress of each color is produced, then even if the design is the same, it won't be awkward to wear the same dress to a party. Miss Gloria's own store is really different. I feel like it completely overturns the rules of other tailors' stores." All of the women began to whisper among themselves. "Miss Gloria, where's your clothing store located? I want to go take a look tomorrow morning," the woman who had asked the question asked with a smile. All of the other women were also looking at Gloria with concern in their eyes. Suede is located in store number 8 from the entrance of the Aiden Square. It should be easy to find from the signboard, Gloria said with a smile. All right, I'll be sure to go take a look tomorrow morning, the woman said with a smile. Big sister, you have to wait for me tomorrow. We'll go take a look together, her friend chimed in. All of the other women didn't say anything, but their expressions indicated that they weren't completely unmoved. Instead, they were all thinking about how to get a beautiful dress before everyone else. A faint smile still hung on Gloria's face, and she didn't seem to be affected by the women's enthusiasm at all. Her hands were tightly clasped together. At the same time, in the partitioned VIP seats, Mag was swirling the crystal glass in his hand gently. The red wine rippled in the amber glass. Mag was a little dazed. Such fine wine seemed to lose its luster if he didn't pour it into a goblet. Although the crystal glass was expensive, it couldn't compare to the elegance of a goblet. Mr. Mag, what do you think of the matter that I mentioned? Hill sat across from Meg and took a sip of wine. The vibrant red wine made her lips even redder, and they appeared especially alluring under the dim yellow light. I'm sorry, Miss Hill, but I don't plan on joining the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. Some of the rules of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce go against the principles and ideals that I've always adhered to. Meg gently placed the wine glass in his hand on the table and shook his head as he looked at Hill. This girl was indeed very beautiful. She was like a vibrant red rose, but with thorns. Chapter 651. Hill put down her wine glass and looked into Meg's eyes as she said, I also think that many of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce's rules are unreasonable and are leading the Aiden Chamber of Commerce down a slippery slope. Hence, I hope that Mr. Meg can change it with me. I look forward to Ms. Hill's vision, but I won't fire Mia as the price for joining the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. Meg shook his head as he looked at the furrowed brows of Hill and continued, furthermore, I don't think that my joining the Aiden Chamber of Commerce will be of much help to your election, Ms. Hill. With Mr. Meg's culinary skills, it's only a matter of time before Mamie's reaches the top of the Aiden Square. In the future, no other restaurant will be able to compete with Mamie's. When that time comes, Mr. Meg will have a lot of say in the food and beverage industry in Chaos City. The food and beverage industry is an important part of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce, and it's also an important part of the election. Ms. Hill leaned forward slightly as she looked at Meg with a serious expression. Meg looked at Ms. Hill with a smile and said, although I don't know much about the Aiden Chamber of Commerce, I know that President Jeffrey has absolute control over the Aiden Chamber of Commerce. If Ms. Hill is only going to follow this strategy and gradually encroach on the Aiden Chamber of Commerce, your chances of winning this election are very slim, right? Or rather, what you're planning is actually the next election. Mr. Meg is indeed a smart man. Ms. Hill faltered slightly before a smile quickly appeared on her face. She leaned back comfortably in her chair and nodded at Meg as she said, I'll fight for this election, but the chances of success are slim, so I'm more focused on the next election. We're still young, but Jeffrey is already old. Isn't that right? Yes, Ms. Hill is only 18 years old, and she'll only be 23 in 5 years. President Jeffrey can't wait that long. Meg nodded as he looked at Ms. Hill with a sigh. Prodigies were not rare in the business world. He had seen many prodigies on Wall Street in his previous life. However, Hill, who was so patient at such a young age and was willing to spend 5 years to set things up, was more like an experienced businessman than those impatient geniuses. She knew her advantages and how to maximize her benefits. A woman like her was very tempting. Mr. Meg, would you be willing to wait with me for 5 years? When that happens, Mamie Restaurant will become the #1 restaurant in the Aiden Square, and all those terrible rules will be abolished. Shear looked at Meg with a smile. 5 years is too long. I'm seizing every minute. Meg shook his head as he looked at Ms. Hill, who was sitting lazily in her chair. He lowered his voice as he said, cooking might not change the outcome of the election, but I have something interesting that might be able to change the structure of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce in a short time. Would Ms. Hill be interested? What is it, Mr. Meg? Ms. Hill asked with a smile as she leaned back in her chair. Ms. Hill, you should know something about the steam engine that President Hader is researching, right? Meg asked with a smile. Could it be? Ms. Hill sat up straight as she looked at Meg in shock. Yes. If I tell you that I have the technology for the complete version of the steam engine, would you believe me, Ms. Hill? Meg nodded. Ms. Hill looked at Meg with disbelief in her eyes, but she quickly concealed her emotions. She nodded and said, "If it were someone else, I wouldn't believe it. But Mr. Meg, I believe you. You are a smart man." Ms. Hill is also a smart woman. You should know what kind of impact the steam engine will have on this world. I actually don't know what kind of impact it will have on this world, but I have a feeling that it will change the world. I just didn't think that it would be developed by Mr. Meg. Ms. Hill looked at Meg with a complex expression. She was in charge of funding Hader. Every quarter, she would meet with Hader and listen to him talk about the development of the steam engine, as well as the direction in which it might be used in the future. Although she didn't know anything about machinery, her keen sense of smell told her that it was something that could change the world 3 years ago. If ordinary ores could be turned into energy that could be controlled, it was hard to imagine what kind of changes would occur in the world. And the first person to master this technology would be the one to lead this revolution and obtain countless opportunities. This was also why her research in Hader had been stagnant for so long, but she still invested a lot of money in them every year. But now, Meg said that he had completely mastered this technology. This was a huge shock to Ms. Hill. Dean Hader has given me a lot of inspiration, but the complete version of the steam engine was developed by me alone. But if we want to use it on a large scale, the City Lord's castle and the Buffett family are obviously good choices. Meg nodded slightly. Ms. Hill's performance showed that she had some understanding of the steam engine, which saved him a lot of time. I already have some ideas about how to use the steam engine. If Ms. Hill has time, maybe you can listen to my ideas. Tomorrow is fine. I want to see the steam engine that Mr. Meg has developed. Is that okay? Ms. Hill asked directly. Yes, Ms. Hill can come to the restaurant after lunch tomorrow. Meg was a little surprised by Ms. Hill's straightforwardness, but he still nodded. I think this will be an interesting collaboration. Ms. Hill raised her wine glass. My thoughts exactly. Meg raised his glass and clinked it gently with Ms. Hill's before taking a sip of red wine at the same time. Right at this moment, Vivian's voice sounded, "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Vivian. I'd like to take a moment of your time to listen to some words that my good friend, Chaos School's teacher, Luna, would like to share with all of you." Mag turned his head to the side in surprise. On the stage at the side of the banquet hall, Vivian passed something that looked like a megaphone to Luna before jumping off the stage. The banquet hall gradually fell silent, and everyone turned to look at Luna on the stage. A beam of light fell upon her, and her light green dress paired with her intricate features gave off a very warm and friendly feeling. Chapter 652. Everyone listened in silence to Luna's speech about giving homeless children a safe haven and giving them a chance to go to school. The expressions on the guests' faces didn't change much. Vivian was the daughter of the city lord, and she wanted everyone to listen, so everyone listened obediently. It wasn't because of how touching the stories were, but because of Vivian, or rather, the city lord. "Teacher Luna, you've always been so good." Amy looked up at Luna with tears shimmering in her bright blue eyes. As expected, her eyes really do shine when she's doing something like this. Vivian looked at Luna with a smile on her face. Her brows furrowed slightly as she looked at the well-dressed merchants. These people didn't seem to be as enthusiastic as she had expected. Meg was also looking at Luna the entire time. This young mistress of a noble family from Rodu had come all the way to Chaos City to become a teacher. She had always been dedicated to helping homeless children and planting the seeds of hope in their hearts. There were some people in this world who didn't care about returns or gains. They were dedicated to doing things that others saw as idiots and did things that were difficult and unrewarding. People like that were known as saints. Meg didn't have any feelings toward saints, but he agreed with this world because those who were known as saints were gentle and adorable. Luna wasn't a complete saint, but the kind of tolerance and love that she exuded made Meg feel very touched. If it weren't for her, Amy and Alex would have had an even more difficult time in Chaos City during the past 3 years. She was the one who planted the seeds of kindness and hope in Amy despite her poverty. How could anyone not want to get close to such an adorable person? Perhaps I should also do something. Meg thought to himself. The restaurant was already on the right track, and the ice cream shop's business was also booming. It wasn't difficult for him to fork out a small portion of the funds. Hill's gaze darted between Meg and Luna, and he asked curiously, "Mr. Meg, what's your relationship with her?" "So there are so many poor children." Gloria looked at Luna with pity on her face. "What a good girl. But it's very hard to be a good person." Camilla shook her head and shifted her gaze from Luna to Gloria. She stroked the head of the black cat in her arms and softly said, "Little Black, what do you think I should do to trick this beautiful young mistress into falling in love with me?" "Madam, given her identity, I suggest you give up on this idea. Chaos City won't sit by and watch the young mistress of Family Moriton be taken away. Also, consult me, Caesar." The black cat resisted and tried to move its head away from that pair of bright red fingernails, but it couldn't escape from that pair of white and slender claws. "Do you think this madam would use such a lowly method to kidnap someone?" Camilla smiled disdainfully. She looked at Gloria and licked her lips slowly. "If I can't win her heart, how can I unlock more positions? I wonder who was the one who kept saying, 'Take her away. Take him away.'" The black cat rolled its eyes. "Shut up." Camilla's hand clenched into a fist, and she punched the black cat's head. She looked at Gloria seriously and said, "This time, I will use my charm to conquer this beautiful young mistress." "Meow." The black cat meowed pitifully. "This matter should be settled by the City Lord's castle, but the City Lord's castle really can't afford it. I didn't expect Luna to think of a way to solve this. If Oldfield knew about this, he would definitely write me a letter." Michael looked at Luna and shook his head shamefully. Jeffrey stood beside him and frowned slightly. No one knew what he was thinking. "Dream on." Cyril looked at Luna with a sneer. "I want to set up a foundation to raise funds for these children to buy their daily necessities and ensure their survival. At the same time, I want to try my best to create opportunities for them to learn." Luna's voice paused. She looked at the wealthy businessman below the stage and sincerely said, "I wonder if all the ladies and gentlemen here are willing to contribute the first batch of funds to the foundation?" The entire venue was still silent. The guests subconsciously avoided Luna's gaze, and no one stepped forward. "These bastards!" Vivian clenched her fists tightly. She had anticipated that these stingy merchants wouldn't donate money so easily, but she didn't think that no one would support them. These people were so stingy that they controlled the vast majority of Chaos City's wealth. Luna's expectant gaze gradually turned into disappointment. She had experienced this many times before, and very few fundraising opportunities in the Aiden Square were successful. However, she still wasn't able to raise enough money for the children in front of so many businessmen. "Teacher Luna, I'm willing to donate all of my money to buy food for them." Right at this moment, a tender voice sounded. Everyone turned toward the source of the voice and saw a little half-elf girl raising her little hand. She took 2 steps forward with a solemn expression and stood on her tiptoes as she extended her hand toward Luna. "It's that little half-elf girl, Mr. Meg's daughter," someone exclaimed. "Amy." Luna faltered slightly at the sight of Amy, standing on her tiptoes with her little hand raised. Her eyes lit up again, and she squatted down as she extended her hand toward Amy. Amy placed her little hand on Luna's hand before releasing it. The 2 copper coins reflected a dazzling light under the light. "Teacher Luna, this is money that I saved up myself. Even Father doesn't know about it. Now, I'm giving it all to you to buy food for them." Amy looked at Luna with a solemn expression. "I'll make good use of it." Luna slowly clenched her hand and nodded earnestly. Even though it was only 2 small copper coins, they were very heavy in her hand. "Good luck, Teacher Luna. You're the best." Amy clenched her little fists as she looked up at Luna with a sweet smile. All of the guests were suddenly struck by a sense of shame upon seeing this, and hesitation appeared on their faces. Chapter 653. The banquet hall was in an uproar because of Cyril's words. The guilt that had just risen in their hearts was blown away like dust by the wind, and a smug and arrogant smile appeared on their faces again. Yes, why should they give money to those lowly and vile fellows? They were just the vermin of Chaos City. Although Luna had wrapped those fellows up with a sad and touching story, in the end, what did the lives of those homeless children who cursed them behind their backs and even had designs on them have to do with them? Cyril listened to those approving words and gazes, and the smile on his face became even more smug. Class was insurmountable. In Chaos City, these merchants in the banquet hall were the highest class. They were standing here, and their children were receiving the best education in Chaos School. After they graduated, some of them would become honorable knights and magic casters, and most of them would inherit their family properties and continue to maintain their noble status in that superior class. Cyril was the representative of this class. Ever since he could remember, he knew that he was destined to be completely different from ordinary people in this life. That was a boundary that could not be crossed. And those lowly and vile homeless children, what right did they have to study in the same school as the sons of nobles? What right did they have to leave that class? If they all became knights and magic casters, who would continue to work for them? How could they show off their noble status in the luxurious carriages? Although those shabbily dressed fellows squatting in the streets and alleys did not look very likable, those pairs of envious eyes were the easiest way for them to gain pleasure. Cyril knew what these merchants were thinking, because he was thinking the same thing. Therefore, he knew that he had said the right thing at the right time, and successfully attracted the attention of the entire banquet hall. He had won back some ground from Gloria. That was what these merchants were thinking. If the merchants only think about how to make money and not give back to Chaos City, what's the use of keeping them? Michael had already stood up and was holding the railing of the VIP seats with an expressionless face. Jeffrey's lips moved, but he still did not say anything. He looked at Cyril with a cold gaze. How did this guy become the successor of Family Moreton with his intellect? In comparison, Miss Gloria seems to be more intelligent. She might become a good opponent in the future. Shear took a glance at Cyril and shook his head with a mocking smile. His gaze then fell on Gloria, who was wearing a blue dress, and his gaze became quite sharp, as if he were a cheetah that had discovered its prey. Luna looked at Cyril, looked at the mocking smiles on their faces, and suddenly felt a chill in her heart. She had imagined many outcomes, but when these seemingly polite merchants tore off their disguises, it still made her shudder. She didn't even know how to deal with them. Bastard! You're talking nonsense. They were not scum. They are all my little friends. They are all very smart. Amy opened her arms and stood in front of Luna. She looked at Cyril with a serious expression on her face. Two small balls of fire and ice flames were slowly dancing in her palms. Oh, little friends? Cyril looked at Amy. This little brat was as disgusting as her father. He sneered and said, "So, you were once a vagrant on the streets? You also received charity from others? Is that why you are so uncultured as to call me a bastard and show off your fireballs? Is your father a boorish chef who only knows how to cook?" Some of the guests burst into laughter upon hearing this. Even though Mag had displayed a lot of potential and had a powerful background, there was still a significant gap between him and Cyril. As such, it wasn't a difficult decision to make. "Are you laughing at my father?" Amy raised her head and asked with a serious expression. "Laughing? Maybe." Cyril shrugged, and the smile on his face became more exaggerated. "Then, you can die." Amy raised her hand, and the red flames and blue flames in her palms instantly soared. The hot temperature and extreme coldness descended at the same time, and the surrounding guests subconsciously retreated. "Protect young Master Cyril." The guards in charge of the banquet were shocked and quickly rushed in this direction. Cyril was also given a fright, and he reflexively stumbled back a couple of steps. He looked at the dancing flames and ice flames, and calmed himself down as he chuckled coldly. "I'm standing right here. Hit me if you want." As soon as he finished speaking, a lotus formed by the fusion of ice flames and flames flew towards him and appeared in front of him in a flash. Cyril's eyes widened. It was a bright lotus, as if it was carved by a craftsman, but the terrifying energy contained in it made him feel despair. The banquet guards were not far away, but these knights couldn't block him before the lotus landed on him. Camilla, who had the power to save him, was standing to the side with a smile while hugging the black cat. City Lord Michael held the railing with both hands, and had no intention of intervening. Shock and panic appeared on the faces of the guests, and a large empty space appeared behind Cyril. No one dared to believe that such a scene would appear at the mid-year banquet of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. If Cyril died, how would the banquet end? This thought flashed through the minds of countless people at the same time, and it was an unimaginable result. At this moment, a foot in a shiny black leather shoe landed on Cyril's butt. Cyril, who was rooted to the spot, was sent flying like a cannonball. His face rubbed against the smooth and flat floor for a few meters before his face stopped. The speed of the ice and fire lotus suddenly decreased, and then it exploded behind Cyril. Just like that, the luxurious red and green robe was blown into pieces, revealing a grayish-black butt and a somewhat shameful wail. "Young Master Cyril, there are some requests that you can't casually make to children. My Amy is so obedient, and if you ask her to hit you, she definitely won't refuse. You'll be teaching children the wrong things." Meg withdrew the leg that was in the midst of the side kick and reached out to block the stinging scene for Amy. He looked at Cyril, who was wrapping the tablecloth that the guards had draped over him tightly with grief and indignation, and shook his head. Furthermore, a person's education isn't determined by their social class or wealth. For example, you, who are full of trash and casually judge a group of people as trash, jumped up because a child called you a bad guy. Your education is really amazing. I'll donate 10% of the ice cream shop's income to Teacher Luna's foundation. What she does is true education, Meg said calmly as he swept his gaze across everyone present. Chapter 654. A smile appeared on Mag's face as he looked at Gloria. He didn't expect Gloria to be the first one to come out and support him. This maiden was braver than he had imagined. Other than Cyril's low EQ and IQ, his rigid social class mentality was what gave him the confidence to stand out. However, Meg couldn't understand why Jeffrey insisted on grooming such a brainless guy to be family Moreton's successor. Wasn't this pushing the whole family into a fire pit? There was nothing wrong with a son inheriting his father's business, but first of all, this son couldn't be a hopeless fool. His father was much smarter back then. He knew that he didn't have the heart nor the ability to inherit the family business, so he found a professional manager to manage the company. It was easier and more efficient than forcing him to squander on stage. In comparison, Gloria, who had just started to adapt to her role, showed Meg more potential and value. This young woman appeared to be weak and frail, but her ability to execute and judge the situation was clearly far superior to Cyril's. At least someone with a brain wouldn't say such things in front of the castellan. The banquet hall was silent. The guests looked at the embarrassed Cyril with strange expressions on their faces. The second young master of Family Moreton, the director of the Aden Chamber of Commerce, was embarrassed by a 4-year-old girl's magic. However, Mag was able to shift all the blame onto Cyril with just a few words, and it was even as if he was denouncing Cyril for his crimes. Everyone couldn't help but burst into laughter. Of course, what was even more shocking was that after Meg expressed his intention to donate to Luna's foundation, Gloria also expressed her intention to donate 1/10 of her income to the foundation. Gloria was the eldest daughter of Family Moreton. In terms of status, she was Cyril's niece. Now that she expressed her intention to donate, it was undoubtedly a slap in the face to Cyril's previous words. As the two candidates for Family Moreton's successor, the competition for the position of successor to the Moreton family was intense. On the other hand, Gloria, who was originally looked down upon by the public, directly stood on the opposite side of Cyril after her stunning debut. This also changed the public's opinion of her. This beautiful young mistress reminded him of the young mistress of the Buffett family. She was now firmly in control of the Buffett family. Would Jeffrey, who had always favored males over females, hand over the position of the family head to Gloria like old Buffett? This question had attracted everyone's attention. "I didn't expect someone to beat me to it." Hill stood at the entrance of the VIP seats and looked at Gloria with a bit of annoyance. "This little girl is quite creative." A smile reappeared on Michael's face as he looked at Gloria. Then, he turned to Amy, and the smile on his face became even more pronounced. The ice and fireball that she had unleashed just now had really won him over. Jeffrey slowly let go of Gloria's hand and nodded slightly, but he still didn't say anything. This guy seems to be a stumbling block. Camilla narrowed her eyes as she looked at Meg. Why do I suddenly smell jealousy? The black cat sniffed around with a puzzled expression. Mr. Meg. Luna looked at Meg, who was standing in front of Amy, and her panicked and helpless heart suddenly calmed down. She felt that as long as she stood behind him, no one would be able to harm her. Cyril felt a burning pain in his butt, but aside from that, he wasn't hurt in any way. However, he had been completely humiliated in front of so many people, so his face was as red as a monkey's butt. Of course, what made him even angrier was Meg's nonchalant attitude, as well as the fact that Gloria was standing directly in front of him. She had already stolen too much of the limelight tonight. You're only taking over the Suede Textile shop temporarily, so what right do you have to donate 10% of the Suede Textile shop's revenue? Cyril sneered at Gloria with a hint of mockery in his voice. Furthermore, the Suede Textile shop has been incurring losses for 3 years in a row. You've been taking over the business for so many days, yet you haven't sold a single piece of fabric. In another half a month, the shop will be completely shut down. So what are you going to donate? Exactly. Do you really think you have a very high status in the family? How dare you make such a decision on your own? Ernie sneered. Who would have thought that this ugly bitch would become so beautiful after taking off her veil? Exactly. She's a complete disgrace to our family Moraton by wearing such revealing clothes. Ernie also sneered with a hint of jealousy and resentment in her eyes as she looked at Gloria. She had stolen all of the limelight today because of that beautiful dress. Looks like it's time for me to save the damsel in distress. This time, I'm going to slap these bastards in the face and capture her heart. Camilla's eyes lit up as a dangerous light flashed through her beautiful eyes. The president has already promised me that as long as I can turn the business around within a month, the Suede Textile shop will belong to me. As such, why can't I donate 10% of the revenue? Gloria ignored Herney and Herney as she looked at Cyril with a relaxed expression. I'm confident that I can turn the Suede Textile shop's losses into a profit. By the way, it's no longer a textile shop, it's a clothing store. And this dress that I'm wearing is one of the new products that they're going to release soon. The cowardly Cinderella has become a confident princess. This angel investment is most likely going to be one of the most successful investments of all time. Meg looked at Gloria with a hint of elation in his eyes. Never put all of your eggs in one basket was a business principle that he believed in. Partnering with the Hill could potentially change the Aden Chamber of Commerce, and investing in Gloria could potentially upend family Moraton from within, thereby changing the Aden Chamber of Commerce. How is this possible? Cyril looked at Gloria's blue dress with incredulity in his eyes. The dress that Gloria was wearing had undoubtedly attracted the attention of everyone present. If such a dress that could make all of the women go crazy were to be released from her clothing store, one could only imagine how many orders she was going to receive. Furthermore, from the moment that she had appeared until now, she had already successfully promoted the blue suede and her dress to all of the guests. Cyril couldn't even begin to imagine what kind of profits these noble women with the most purchasing power in Chaos City were going to bring to her clothing store. However, one thing that he was sure of was that as long as Gloria could provide enough dresses, not only would Suede Textile shop's losses be turned into profits, it would also quickly become a profitable business. Cyril placed a hand on the shoulder of the knight beside him and was suddenly struck by a sense of dejection. He had clearly lost this challenge to Suede, and Gloria's threat to him was no longer just a joke. She really didn't give me a chance at all. Camilla had just taken a step forward when she withdrew her foot again and was feeling a little vexed. I think she might like men, the black cat murmured in a low voice. Chapter 655. This dress is from Miss Gloria's own clothing store. It's called Suede, right? Hurry up and write down this important piece of information. We'll go to the store tomorrow morning and pre-order one. It looks like the battle for family Moraton's successor is starting to shift from Cyril's complete domination. That's right. If Miss Gloria can display her superb business acumen, who knows if the president will choose her like Master Ian. Some of the women who hadn't heard the news before were very interested in it, and the businessmen began to ponder the information that had just been divulged. If they had to choose a side in the future, this information would be very important. Herty and Herney's expressions darkened. Gloria's disregard was even more unacceptable to them than her insults. It was as if she was telling them that she was no longer on the same level as them. Jeffrey, are you planning to hand over family Moreton to this little girl like Ian? I think her EQ and IQ are comparable to that of the Buffett family's girl. Michael turned to Jeffrey with a smile. Even though his tone was relaxed, his gaze was very sharp. I've given her a chance, but whether she can grasp it or not will depend on her own abilities. If a woman wants to be in power, she has to put in more effort. Jeffrey looked at Gloria and shook his head slightly. Compared to the Buffett family's girl, she's far from enough. Don't be so smug. Not everyone's girl grows up in a bank like the Buffett family's girl, Michael said with a smile. Jeffrey didn't say anything in response. However, he was looking at Gloria with a hint of gratification in his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Big sister is so awesome today. It feels like she's a completely different person. Mickey looked at Gloria standing in the crowd with his mouth slightly agape. His initial worry had been replaced by surprise and pride. Gloria, you've grown up. You're even more outstanding than I was back then. Lance's expression was a little complicated. He was a little gratified, but also a little distressed. Yes, she has grown up. Just like what we said when she was born, she has grown into a beautiful girl. Deborah gently held Lance's hand and said with a smile. Her eyes were wet with tears. Cyril took a deep breath to calm himself down before releasing the knight's arm. He looked at Gloria with a cold smile and said, Even if you and he are willing to give it to me, only idiots like you would do something like that. Do you think there are idiots like you among all of us here? I'd like to see what you're going to use to fill this bottomless pit. Buffett Banks will provide a fund for the teaching of the homeless children. Mr. Hill slowly made his way out of the crowd. He looked at Luna and said, Young Mistress Luna, I hope you can give us a proposal and a budget. Regardless of whether you want to set up a separate school or join the chaos school system, Buffett Banks will be responsible for all of the funding. Oh, all right. Luna's eyes immediately lit up. She looked at Mr. Hill with an incredulous expression as she nodded. President Jeffrey, I think it's only been a few decades since the rise of our Chamber of Commerce in Chaos City. It seems that all of you have forgotten that your ancestors were just ordinary people back in the day. Why can't we give a portion of the money we've earned back to those children? Mr. Hill turned to Jeffrey with a smile and asked, Would you be willing to be an idiot for once, President? Cyril's face instantly turned deathly pale. Never would he have thought that Mr. Hill would suddenly stand up for him. Not only did he promise a huge sum of money, he was also directly targeting Jeffrey. Regardless of whether Jeffrey agreed or not, he had clearly suffered a crushing defeat today. He hadn't been able to save any face in the end, and his status in Jeffrey's heart would plummet even further. All of the guests' expressions also became very interesting. The businessmen from the Buffett faction were already considering how much they should donate, while the businessmen from the Moreton faction all turned to Jeffrey in unison. Jeffrey and Mr. Hill were already embroiled in a heated debate. It was clear that Mr. Hill wanted to slap Cyril in the face. If Jeffrey wanted to protect him, then there was no way that he would agree at a time like this. As such, they naturally wouldn't be in a hurry to donate. Michael glanced at Jeffrey, but didn't say anything. Meg looked at Mr. Hill in amazement. She was indeed a woman who could take charge of a large family at the age of 18. Her words were like a bullet to the soul. If Jeffrey didn't agree, he would be protecting Cyril, but he would also leave a label in Michael's heart that he didn't have enough political awareness. It was obviously not a good result to be in the business circle of Chaos City. If he were to agree to Cyril's request, that would be a sign of his political awareness, but it would also expose Cyril's lack of intelligence. The internal conflict between the heirs of the Moreton family would become a fatal flaw, and it would greatly affect the decisions of the merchants who were wavering between the two sides. Jeffrey glanced at Cyril, and then turned to Gloria. He nodded slightly and said, I agree with Gloria's suggestion. Apart from the 1/10 of Blue Suede's income that she donated, Family Moreton will bear the cost of the children's accommodation so that they can have a home. I think those children will be grateful to you, President Jeffrey, Mr. Hill said with a smile. There was a hint of joy in his eyes that his scheme had succeeded. "Thank you, President Jeffrey." Luna bowed deeply in the direction of the VIP seats. Hot tears were already welling up in her eyes. Initially, she only wanted to donate some food for the children to get through the winter. But now, the promise she received had far exceeded her expectations. It was even enough to give those children a good childhood. Cyril staggered 2 steps back. He barely managed to stay upright because the night behind him supported him. His face was pale, and his forehead was full of cold sweat. Jeffrey's cold glance just now made him feel as if he had fallen into an ice cave. And what he said was more like a choice between him and Gloria. The president has also chosen to donate money, and he has chosen Miss Gloria. Could it be that Miss Gloria will become the next Miss Hill? That's hard to say, but we have to donate this money. We can only close our eyes and be fools. The guests who were familiar with each other spoke softly, each with their own thoughts. They were trying to determine what changes would happen to the Aden Chamber of Commerce because of this banquet. "I'm very touched by Miss Luna's suggestion and what she has done. I'm also very gratified that all of you, as the most outstanding and top businessmen in Chaos City, are willing to donate generously to the children." Michael walked out from the VIP seats, and his powerful voice reverberated throughout the banquet hall. "I hope that all of you can understand one thing clearly. In Chaos City, social classes are not fixed. We will promote education for all citizens so that all capable residents can realize their value for the development of Chaos City." Chapter 656. Thank you, thank you, thank you. A smile appeared on Mag's face as he looked at Luna, who was being thanked by the merchants for their donations. "Those children will thank Mr. Meg." The Hill stood beside Meg and said with a smile. Mag shook his head as he looked at Sheer with a serious expression and said, "Young Mistress Sheer, you've solved their problem of studying and given them another possibility and hope in the future. They should thank you. If it wasn't for Mr. Meg, I wouldn't have agreed to donate to those children. After all, merchants aren't good people. They put profit above everything else." The Hill smiled meaningfully. "When it comes to charity, it doesn't matter if it's related to profit. As long as you do it, it's better than those who don't do anything. After all, no matter how good you say it, it's not as good as giving them a bun." Meg smiled. In his previous life, many capitalists who did charity wanted to use charity to build connections and get more resources. However, Meg always believed that even if their goal wasn't really to do charity, it was still more practical than those who carried a bunch of keyboards and didn't donate a single cent. Since they did it, it was a good thing. Mr. Meg's thoughts are always so interesting. The Hill was slightly stunned. Looking at Meg's sincere smile, he suddenly felt that he couldn't see through this man. Miss Hill is also an interesting person. Meg looked at the Hill. Although he was only 18 years old, the Hill gave him the feeling that he was very mature. He was like a wily old fox who had rolled around in the business world for decades. "It seems that I should give Mr. Meg some personal space. Let's meet at your restaurant tomorrow morning." The Hill looked at Gloria, who was walking towards them, and said to Meg. She took a couple of steps forward before stopping in front of Gloria. She looked into her eyes with a smile and said, "Young Mistress Gloria, I heard that you only have one dress of each color that you're wearing. Can I reserve the red dress?" Gloria stopped and nodded without averting her eyes. "If Miss Hill wants it, of course." "Okay, here's my size. When it's done, I'll come and pick it up myself." Sheer handed Gloria a note that she had written at some point and nodded in acknowledgement before walking past her. "But Gloria took the note and wanted to say something, but the Hill was already chatting with the others. Mag suddenly appeared beside Gloria with a smile and said, "Seeing as you're only going to make one dress of each color, and you're going to focus on premium quality, perhaps it would be better for this dress to be custom-made. Is that so?" Gloria was a little surprised. She was a little confused. The price is determined by the service. Good service can add a lot of value to the product. Meg nodded. Gloria's eyes lit up. She nodded hard. "I understand. Today's show was very beautiful. As long as the price is reasonable, the clothing store will be able to turn the store's losses around. Meg looked at Gloria with encouragement. Thank you, Mr. Meg. I really don't know how to thank you. Gloria looked at Meg with gratitude. Those children would definitely be very happy if they could wear new clothes. Their smiles would be the best form of thanks, Mag said with a smile. Yes, yes. After this batch of dresses is done, I'll ask them to hurry up and make a batch for the children so they can wear new clothes as soon as possible. Gloria nodded and smiled like a blooming flower. This guy is going to be the biggest obstacle in my path to Miss Gloria. Camilla looked at Meg with a cold gaze. But the steak he makes is super delicious. Black Cat whispered. Yeah, that steak is so delicious. I've never had such a delicious steak before. Camilla's eyes immediately lit up. However, she soon fell into a dilemma. After hesitating for a long while, she sighed and said, All right, I'll let you off the hook for now. Meg chatted with Gloria for a while. Then, he left Gloria to the noblewomen who were eager to book her. Still not full? Meg walked to the side of the stage. He smiled and patted Amy, who was stuffing an orange into her mouth. Father, this orange is very sweet. Do you want to try it? Amy's eyes narrowed with a smile. She raised her hand high and offered a slice of orange to Meg. Meg bent down and opened his mouth to receive it. He bit down and the sweet orange juice and tender orange flesh exploded in his mouth. He nodded and smiled. Yes, it's very sweet. Thank you, Mr. Meg. The children finally have a chance to go to school. Luna finally finished receiving the last merchant. The book in her hand was already filled with names and donations. She looked at Meg with excitement. Yes, I didn't think that Mr. Mac's appeal would be so strong. He really is amazing. Vivian, who had been assisting Luna the entire night, also gave Meg a thumbs up. She was also unable to hide the excitement on her face. It's teacher Luna's teachings that have touched everyone. Clearly, the City Lord and Ms. Vivian are the ones who have the most appeal, Meg said with a smile. In any case, I'm going to visit Mamie's often to eat grilled fish in the future. Just for your righteous actions, Vivian said with a serious expression. Still, thank you very much. Luna bowed to Meg with a serious expression. She knew why the tables had suddenly turned. For that, Meg was willing to offend Cyril and family Moraton. Teacher Luna, what you've done is worthy of everyone's respect. I only did what I could. Meg hurriedly helped Luna up. Right at this moment, a figure sounded from behind Meg. Mr. Meg, I am Carols, the Roth Empire's ambassador to Chaos City. May I have a private chat with you? Meg turned around to discover a tall and broad middle-aged man with brown hair and green eyes. He was wearing a golden robe and was none other than the ambassador of the Roth Empire, one of the judges of the duel. Greetings, ambassador. What can I do for you? A hint of surprise flashed through Meg's eyes as he tried to calm himself down. This was the first time that he was interacting with an official of the Roth Empire, and this was an official from Josh's faction, so he had to be careful. This way, please. Carols pointed to the VIP seats before leading the way. Meg hesitated momentarily before quickly following along. Chapter 657. Huh. Meg stared at Carols with a surprised expression. He had thought of many reasons why Carols was looking for him, but never did he think that he would be invited to Rodu to cook for the king. It's like this. The king's birthday is coming up, and His Highness Josh asked me to find something to celebrate the king's birthday with. After tasting your steak today, I feel like there's no better way to celebrate the king's birthday than to have Mr. Meg cook a few dishes for him. Carols was very pleased with Meg's reaction. It was an honor to be able to cook for the king of the Roth Empire. A conflicted expression appeared on Meg's face as he replied, Well, I appreciate your kind intentions, Ambassador Carols, but my culinary skills are simply not up to par. How could I be worthy of cooking for the revered king of the Roth Empire? If something were to happen to me, then I'd only be able to keep my life. However, if I were to implicate Ambassador Carols and His Highness Josh, that would be a huge sin. Only an idiot would go there. Mag rolled his eyes internally. Alex had only just escaped from Rodu over 3 years ago, and he was now asking him to seek out the second prince, Josh. There was no way he was going to do something that would only put him in a very precarious position. Josh and the Magus Tower definitely had something to do with the mastermind behind the ambush on that rainy night. Vengeance was unavoidable, but with his current power, he couldn't even kill Josh's guards, let alone take revenge. As such, there was no reason for him to go to Rodu before he recovered his powers. Ding. New mission issued by the system. Please accept this person's invitation to travel to Rodu and cook for the king. Mission reward. A mega reward. At the same time, the restaurant will be upgraded to level 3. Punishment for mission failure. 3 strength points will be deducted. Right at this moment, the system's voice suddenly sounded. System, you bought me insurance, right? And you're the beneficiary? Meg asked internally with a complex expression. The system does not provide insurance services, the system replied in a serious manner. Then you're fucking pushing me into a fire pit. Do you really want to kill me so much that you can find someone else? Is Rodu a place you can go to just because you want to? If I were to go, not even my bones would be left. Meg roared in his heart. This system was too fucking unreliable. Moreover, this punishment was something that Meg could not bear. He only had 5 points in his body. If 3 points were deducted, wouldn't he return to his previous state and become a useless person again? Why don't you just set the penalty as a deduction of 5 points? You don't even need to leave 5 points for me. Meg added, if 5 is deducted, the host will be directly erased. This goes against the system's basic rules, so the host cannot do such a thing. Also, please don't get too excited. According to the system's calculations, there's a 50% chance that you won't encounter any danger during this trip to Rodu, so there's still a very high chance that you'll survive. The system replied seriously, I'm living a good life. Why would I have to go through something that could kill me? Meg rolled his eyes, still very displeased. This sudden incident has triggered the system's hidden mission. The most exceptional chefs of the Roth Empire will be gathered at the birthday banquet of the king of the Roth Empire. If you can defeat those top-notch chefs at the banquet, it will be a victory for your path to becoming the god of cookery, and it will also be able to elevate your reputation to a higher level. This is a process that every god of cookery has to go through. It can't be changed. Meg took a deep breath. He had already guessed the system's intentions. It was trying to create a god during the king's birthday banquet, but he still didn't want to expose himself to danger like this. The system does not have the authority to change the hidden mission, and the rewards and punishments will be handed out in strict accordance with the rules. I wish you good luck. The system's voice then disappeared. Carol's expression stiffened upon hearing this. He didn't think that Meg would turn him down. However, it appeared that he was concerned about his cooking skills, so he smiled and said, You're far too modest, Mr. Meg. I've tasted all of the famous restaurants in Rodu and Chaos City, and the steak cooked by you is the most delicious food I've ever tasted. City Lord Michael and President Jeffrey have also expressed their approval of Mr. Meg's cooking skills. If even someone like him can't be praised, then there won't be a single chef in Chaos City who's worthy of praise. Well, a hesitant look appeared on Meg's face. Even though he had spent a lot of time arguing with the system, only a short while had actually passed. However, his mind was filled with thoughts of how to get out of this situation, and he didn't know whether he should accept Carol's invitation or not. He didn't want to go to Rodu, but he also didn't want to become a cripple who needed to lean against a wall to walk. Now, he had no other choice. Carol's could see the hesitant look on Meg's face, and he had already made up his mind. The smile on his face became even brighter as he said, Rest assured, Mr. Meg. If you agree to go to Rodu, His Highness Joshua definitely won't let you get away scot-free. Aside from the exorbitant appearance fee, if your cooking skills can satisfy His Majesty, perhaps you'll have an opportunity to become a chef in the royal palace. Furthermore, His Highness will also reward you with an additional sum of money that will ensure that you don't have to worry about food or clothing for the rest of your life. Meg's expression quickly returned to normal, and he turned to Carols as he said, Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Ambassador Carols. However, I'm currently running a restaurant, and I have a child with me, so I still need some time to consider whether I should go to Rodu or not. All right, then I'll await your good news, Mr. Meg. Carols was a little surprised to hear this, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he added, by the way, I'll be returning to Rodu in 15 days to attend the king's birthday banquet. I hope Mr. Meg can give me an accurate reply before then. All right. Meg nodded before exiting the VIP area. Carols looked at Meg's departing figure and heaved a resigned sigh as he murmured to himself, that's a great gift. I wonder if Mr. Meg will agree to it. If we weren't in Chaos City, I would have tied him up with a rope and dragged him back to Rodu. After exiting the private room, Meg was quickly surrounded by a group of merchants. After exchanging a few pleasantries, he finally managed to break free from the crowd and return to Amy's side. Following the conclusion of the banquet, the incident of Amy using magic during the banquet was glossed over by Michael without receiving any punishment or warning. Meg followed Amy and Luna out of the Aiden Chamber of Commerce building with the sleeping ugly duckling in his right hand. Luna was holding Amy's little hand and lecturing her with a serious expression. Amy, you protected teacher today, but you can't use magic in public places in the future. That bad guy is bad, but he's not so bad that he deserves to die right away. The people around him are even more innocent. If they were to be injured or killed by Amy's magic, then Amy would have done something bad. But he said bad things about father, Amy said in a quiet voice with an aggrieved expression. I heard that as well. However, no matter what, we can't take someone's life for no good reason. That's the most basic rule. Luna stopped in her tracks and squatted down in front of Amy. She looked at her with a serious expression and asked, Can you do that? Chapter 658. Meg, who was studying Luna's method of educating Amy, faltered slightly upon hearing this. He turned to look at Vivian, and a hint of unease flashed through his heart. After a moment of silence, he shook his head and said, She didn't die. She just ran away. With another man? Vivian seemed to have understood something, and she patted Meg on the shoulder with a comforting expression. Don't worry, you can always find another woman. You won't be able to keep a woman like her. However, I didn't think that there would be a woman in this world who could leave you. I'm suddenly very curious. What kind of woman could escape from your hands that can cook all kinds of delicious food? Or rather, what kind of miraculous man has such powerful charisma? A curious expression appeared on Vivian's face again. Meg's face instantly darkened, and he felt as if he had suddenly become a pitiful man who had been cuckolded. Even his wife had run away with another man. It's not as complicated as you think. I can only say that our encounter was a beautiful misunderstanding, and it has nothing to do with anyone else. Meg tried his best to appear nonchalant. It's all right. I can understand. Any man who encounters something like this would definitely not feel good. Vivian gave him a knowing expression. Meg rolled his eyes. What the fuck do you understand? If that's the case, then she probably won't come back, right? Or rather, if she comes back in the future, will you still forgive her? Vivian continued to ask. Of course I'll forgive her. After all, she's still the mother of my child. Meg had already guessed some things from Vivian's expression, and he nodded with a smile. Skadiske, I didn't think that you would be such a great man, Vivian said with a wistful expression. Meg gave a noncommittal smile and didn't continue to respond to Vivian's words. This girl's brain circuit was not very normal, and he could easily be led astray by her words. Okay, I understand, Teacher Luna. Amy promised earnestly as she looked at Luna. Good girl. Because of our Amy, the other children can go to school today and have new clothes to wear, Luna said with a gentle smile as she stroked Amy's hair. Then, are they going to Chaos School for lessons too? Amy's eyes lit up. Luna shook her head and said, I'm not sure yet. I have to ask the principal first. It would be best if I could attend classes at Chaos School. Teacher Luna, you're the best. Amy threw her arms around Luna's neck and kissed her on the cheek with a bright smile on her face. Amy is also very obedient, Teacher Luna said with a smile as she gently touched Amy's forehead with her forehead. Sigh, what a pity. Vivian heaved a forlorn sigh as she looked at Meg with a meaningful expression. There are a lot of stars today, Meg murmured to himself as he looked up at the sky. It makes sense that your wife would run away with someone else, Vivian murmured as she looked at Meg. My wife didn't run away with someone else. Meg almost couldn't help but grumble. After watching Luna and Vivian leave in the same horse-drawn carriage, Meg pushed out his bicycle and was just about to take Amy home when two black figures suddenly appeared in front of the bicycle. Meg narrowed his eyes as he looked at the two black figures in front of the bicycle. He shielded Amy behind him and asked with a hint of surprise, "Why are you blocking my way, Madame Bartoli? If you like the steak today, you can try it at Amy's tomorrow." The two black figures were none other than the seductive Countess Bartoli and the black cat that had donned its black robe again. Meow. Ugly Duckling, which was lying in the basket of the bicycle, immediately woke up and meowed at the black cat. "I'm here for the steak." Camilla's voice abruptly trailed off, and she stomped her foot in annoyance. The lines that she had thought of had been led astray by Meg, and the delicious steak suddenly popped up in her mind. She cleared her throat and said, "I'm here to warn you to stay away from Miss Gloria in the future. She's the woman I've taken a liking to." Meg raised an eyebrow as he looked at Camilla with a hint of surprise on his face. The seductive Countess Bartoli had taken a liking to a woman she had taken a liking to? There was too much information contained in that sentence, and even with Meg's comprehension ability, it still took him 3 seconds to sort it out and make his own judgment. This Countess Bartoli was most likely a lesbian, and she had taken a liking to Miss Gloria, so she had inexplicably viewed him as her #1 love rival. That was why she was blocking a bicycle and issuing a warning that looked like something that only a middle school student would do. Of course, Meg had stopped doing things like that after graduating from elementary school. "Well, I'm working with Miss Gloria, so we have to communicate when it comes to work." Meg didn't know whether he should laugh or cry as he looked at Camilla. "Don't think that I won't dare to do anything to you just because your steak is delicious. My title as Countess Bartoli's wife is not just for show. In my dark heart castle, there are all kinds of torture methods. If you dare to disobey me, I'll give you a taste of the whip and the dripping of wax." Camilla raised her chin slightly as she looked at Meg with a disdainful expression. What the hell is this inexplicable anticipation? Meg looked at the Countess Bartoli, and he couldn't help but imagine Camilla holding a candle and waving a whip around. "Don't worry, Countess Bartoli. Miss Gloria and I are purely working together. There are no other feelings involved. I have a child, after all." Meg cast aside the strange thoughts in his mind with a righteous expression. "That's true." Camilla thought for a moment before nodding slightly. Whoosh! The sound of a cloak being lifted sounded. "Wow, what a big black cat." Amy, who had snuck up beside Camilla, was holding a corner of the cloak in her hand as she looked at the black cat floating in midair with elation on her face. Meow. The black cat faltered slightly before instantly bristling with rage. It was like a woman who had been stripped naked, and it immediately leaped into Camilla's arms as it looked at Amy with resentment in its eyes. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling meowed excitedly in the basket as it grabbed onto the edge of the basket with its front paws as if it were about to jump out. "Remember your promise." Camilla didn't care about Amy as she looked at Meg coldly. She turned around with the black cat in her arms before stopping in her tracks. "I'll be visiting your restaurant tomorrow night. Get ready to receive your guests." After saying that, she walked away without looking back. Suddenly, she transformed into a cloud of black mist before transforming into a huge bat and disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. "It's just a meal. Can you not make it sound so erotic?" Meg face-bombed. As expected, this Countess Bartoli was no ordinary person. "Ugly Duckling, look at it. It can fly, but you have to pant after taking 2 steps. It's because you're too fat that you can't fly. From tomorrow onwards, your appetite will be halved." Chapter 659. Meg rode his bicycle toward the restaurant with furrowed brows as he contemplated his trip to Rodu. This trip was most likely unavoidable, so the most important thing was to increase his safety. He definitely couldn't be recognized as Alex. His opponent was too powerful, and if he were to be recognized, he wouldn't even be able to keep his life, let alone take revenge. Under the bridge in front of the door, a flock of ducks swam past. Amy sat on the back seat and sang the song of counting ducks in her crisp voice. She was waving her arms happily and seemed to be in a very good mood. Ugly Duckling was lying in the basket of the bicycle, rolling from left to right and then from right to left again. Its eyes were rolled up and it wore a forlorn expression. "Father, did I sing well?" Amy suddenly interrupted Meg's train of thought. "Huh." Meg faltered momentarily before suddenly feeling a little apologetic. He smiled and said, "Yes, Amy sang very well. Father wants to hear another song." All right. Then I'll sing, The Little Girl Who Picks Mushrooms." Amy nodded happily after being praised. Then, she began to sing, The Little Girl Who Picks Mushrooms, carrying her crisp voice was a little soft and pleasant to the ear. Meg listened quietly and temporarily cast all of his worries to the back of his mind. Spending time alone with Amy like this always gave him peace of mind very quickly. It was as if he had found a safe harbor. The bicycle stopped outside the restaurant, and Meg carried Amy and Ugly Duckling off the bicycle. He looked around at the pitch-black restaurant and was a little perplexed as he asked, "Why aren't the lights on? Could it be that Barbara is already asleep? Is big sister Barbara a little piggy? Why is she sleeping so early?" Amy asked with a smile as she carried the dizzy Ugly Duckling in her arms. "Maybe." Meg smiled as he pulled out his keys to open the door. He was just about to open the door when he suddenly discovered a black shadow lying in front of the restaurant. It was a human figure. Fuck. Meg was so scared that he almost threw the door in his hand. In the dark restaurant, a figure with disheveled hair was lying face down at the entrance of the restaurant. One of his hands was pointing in the direction of the door as if to say, "The murderer is... it's Sister Barbara. What happened to her?" Amy crouched down with Ugly Duckling in her arms and asked anxiously. Meg reached out and turned on the light. It was Barbara lying at the door. Her left hand was hanging by her side, and her right index finger was stretched out. She seemed to be writing something on the ground. Her face was pale, and she was motionless. A murder scene? Meg was also inexplicably panicked when he saw this scene. He quickly bent down and placed his fingers on Barbara's neck artery. Her skin was slightly cold to the touch, but he could still feel a weak pulse. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. It was good that she wasn't dead. "There's a line of words here," Amy said, pointing at Barbara's hand. Meg moved Barbara's hand slightly to the side, revealing a line of words written in black charcoal ash. "Give me beef kebabs." After turning Barbara's hand over, he discovered that there were traces of charcoal ash left on her index finger. This girl didn't faint from hunger, did she? Meg looked at Barbara with a perplexed expression. He had left dinner for Barbara in the incubator before he went out tonight. She seemed to be sleeping, so he wrote a note and stuck it on the kitchen door. "Then, Father, what should we do now?" Amy looked at Meg with curiosity in her eyes. "Let's wake her up first." Meg turned Barbara over before picking her up in his arms. She was 1.55 meters tall and flat-chested, so she was almost weightless in his arms, just like a small child. "System, help me scan her body and find out what's wrong with her body," Meg said to the system in his mind as he stopped in front of the door. "The host doesn't have the authority to conduct a medical diagnosis at the moment. Please ascend to." The system's voice sounded. 500 copper coins per diagnosis. Do you want to do it or not?" Meg interrupted the system. "Do it." The system's reply wasn't pretentious in the slightest. "Ding. Examination complete. 500 copper coins have been deducted. The examination report has been generated. Please check it." The system's voice soon sounded again. Mag placed Babla on a table at the side and began to carefully read through the test report in his mind. Barbara, 15 years old, gender, female, strength, 7th tier spatial magician. Diagnosis, severe hypoglycemia, severe anemia, severe flat-chested. All other indicators normal. System, what the hell is this severe flat-chested illness of yours? Meg almost thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him and couldn't help but complain. According to modern medical principles, severe flat-chested illness is also a female illness. If it can't be effectively improved, it may cause a great impact on a female's physiology and psychology, the system said righteously. You're good at bullshitting. Meg rolled his eyes and couldn't be bothered to continue arguing with the system. Severe hypoglycemia and severe anemia. It really wasn't easy for a princess to develop such an illness. However, since the diagnosis had been completed, Meg had an idea in his heart. At least it wasn't some heart disease, cancer, or any other incurable illness. She should be fine after drinking some sugar water and replenishing her blood. Meg went into the kitchen to pour a cup of Spring of Life and added 2 spoonfuls of sugar. He then helped Barbara up and slowly fed her. After a while, Barbara's pale face visibly improved, and some color returned to her face. Her originally weak breathing also gradually quickened, and her body regained some temperature and was no longer cold. Where am I? Barbara slowly opened her eyes and spoke in a weak voice. Then, her gaze fell on Meg's face, and she was momentarily stunned when she saw his face so close to hers. Barbara suddenly felt that her body had regained its senses, and then she felt a pair of warm hands on her back. Her eyes widened, and her face reddened, and she stood up from the table with a whoosh. However, her body, which had just recovered a bit of strength, swayed, and she lost her balance and fell into Meg's arms. Her hands subconsciously wrapped around Meg's neck, and her face was almost pressed against his. I said, I'm just saving you out of humanitarianism. You don't have to throw yourself into my arms like this, do you? Meg was still holding the cup in his hand, and his arms were spread open as he looked at Barbara, who had her arms around his neck and was almost pressing her face against his. He really couldn't arouse the slightest interest in this kind of child who hadn't even started puberty. Chapter 660. Barbara raised her head to look at Meg. At this moment, she felt like dying. Not only was her body touched by a man, but her precious knees were also kneeling in front of this man. What was even more terrifying was, she actually pressed her face against this man's body, sliding from his chest all the way to his thighs. Although she was a little surprised by the tight curves of this man's body under his clothes, the heat from his body almost made her suffocate. How could something like this happen to her, Princess Barbara of the Moon Nation? How could a man touch her body? A man should be kneeling in front of her. But now, Barbara realized that she couldn't even move. Her limp body couldn't muster any strength, and her knees seemed to be nailed to the ground. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't move. She couldn't even move from such a humiliating position. This man, did he put that kind of drug in the water? The kind that makes women unable to move after drinking it and can only be manipulated by men? But AI me is still next to me. This pervert. Men are all pigs indeed. Babla's eyes widened, and she began to panic as she looked at Mag. Big sister Barbara, are you thanking Father? Amy asked curiously. Meg looked at Barbara, who had knelt in front of him, and was stunned. He didn't expect this girl to be so grateful despite her proud appearance. It was just that he wasn't used to such a way of thanking him. You don't have to be so polite. No matter what, you're still an employee of my restaurant. Mag shook his head with a smile as he pulled Babla over to a nearby chair. He then handed a glass of water to Babla and said, You have severe hypoglycemia and anemia, so you can't starve yourself. Otherwise, you'll faint very easily, and you could even be in danger. I've added some sugar to this water, so drink some. Hypoglycemia? Anemia? Barbara was stunned by Meg's words. Could it be that Meg knew what illness she had? And he wasn't taking advantage of her just now, but was just helping her? Low blood sugar, so you need to drink more sugar, right? Amy turned to Mag with a curious expression as she asked, If she's anemic, then wouldn't Big Sister Babla drink blood? Even if I die, I won't drink your blood. Before Meg could say anything, Barbara had already said with a face as if she was unafraid of death, Even if you want to drink it, I can't afford it. Meg pursed his lips. He wasn't going to raise a vampire. He put the cup next to Barbara's mouth and slowly raised it. Barbara wanted to refuse, but as the cup approached her, she smelled a faint fragrance. With only a sniff, She felt much more refreshed, just like the faint fragrance in the Yangzhou fried rice. After hesitating for a while, she opened her mouth and drank it. The water was cool and refreshing, and just as Meg said, a lot of sugar had been added. It tasted sweet, but not greasy at all. After drinking a few mouthfuls of the spring of life, Barbara felt a magical power rising from her body. Her sore and weak limbs gradually regained their feeling, and her empty body seemed to be filled up all of a sudden. She suddenly had strength. "It seems that you're fine now. Do you want me to feed you?" Meg looked at Barbara's gradually improving complexion, and a smile appeared on his face. "I don't want anyone to feed me." Barbara snatched the cup. Looking at Meg, who had a gentle smile on his face, and Amy, who had a concerned expression on her face, she lowered her eyes and said to the cup, "This kind of thing is very common for me. It's no problem at all." Meg looked at Babla, who was sipping her water with her head lowered. This proud princess seemed to be more resilient than he had imagined. Even though she was of noble birth, it seemed that she was carrying a lot on her shoulders. "With your illness, you can't starve, but I prepared dinner for you in an incubator before I went out today, and I also pasted a note on the kitchen door." "You." Meg pointed at the door. He looked in the direction of his finger, and then looked at Barbara. He suddenly felt a little embarrassed. You might not be able to see it. He thought the height was normal, but for Barbara, it was much higher than the top of her head. If she didn't look carefully, she might not be able to see it accurately. Humph, Barbara continued drinking. She hated it when people called her short. If it weren't for the fact that Meg had just saved her, she would definitely make them pay the price. "Then I'll go make you something to eat. The beef kebabs need to be marinated, so I'll make steak." Meg walked toward the kitchen a little awkwardly. If news of him almost starving his employees to death got out, he would definitely be labeled as a capitalist who abused his employees. "Steak?" A hint of confusion appeared on Babla's face. This dish didn't seem to be on Mamie Restaurant's menu. Amy pulled out a chair and sat down across from Barbara and said with a serious expression, "Father's steak is super delicious. Everyone who has tried it says it's good." "Is it better than beef kebabs?" Barbara was a little skeptical. "It's as good as beef kebabs," Amy said matter-of-factly. "Really?" Barbara's eyes lit up. She was a little expectant. Beef kebabs were the best beef she had ever eaten. "Of course it's true." Amy nodded with certainty. Meg walked into the kitchen. The steak cooking utensils were already placed on the stove. The striped grill could roast 8 steaks at the same time, which was enough for daily operations. There was an extra box of black pepper in the 32-square spice box on the stove. He opened the fridge and saw that the steaks had been sliced into thin, thick, and of exactly the same size. Even the texture was almost identical. They were already neatly arranged on plates. It was very convenient to use them at any time. Next to the cupboard, there was a standing oak wine barrel. There was a retro faucet switch below it. Meg leaned forward and took a sniff. The faint aroma of red wine and oak hit him in the face. His eyes lit up and he praised, "Good wine." Meg reached out and took a transparent glass from the side. He pressed the switch, and the bright red wine fell into the quilt. It was clear and translucent, as red as blood. A mellow aroma of wine instantly filled the entire kitchen. Meg gently swirled the wine in the glass. The red wine rippled in the glass, and then he took a sip. It had a delicate and open texture, yet it was reserved and gentle like a maiden's. The alluring aroma was filled with spices, honey, vanilla, and a light mineral fragrance, which made Meg's brows relax. "System, where did you steal this wine from?" Chapter 661. In the northern part of the city, within the Roth Empire's embassy in Chaos City, K-Rawls emerged from his study and handed a letter to his butler with a serious expression as he said, "Deliver this to His Highness using a falcon." "Yes, master." The butler accepted the letter with both hands before quickly making his way into the courtyard. K-Rawls was just about to enter his study when the sound of hurried footsteps sounded from behind him. "Father, I have something to tell you." A tall and thin young man quickly walked into the courtyard. He had a hooked nose and a head of brown curly hair, and his complexion was a little sickly pale. However, he seemed to be in good spirits, and he quickly made his way over to Carol's. "What is it, Elijah?" Carol's asked with a smile. He had always doted on this second son of his who had always been frail since he was a child. "Father, after you return to Rodu to report on your duties, will you be staying in Rodu as the ambassador of Chaos City?" Elijah asked. "That's right. If everything goes according to plan, I'll be staying in Rodu after this report. As such, I told your mother and sister to return to Rodu first a month ago. You'll be coming with me on this trip." Carol's nodded in response. He had mentioned this to Elijah before, so he didn't know why he was asking again. "Has it been confirmed?" A hint of dejection appeared on Elijah's face. "With His Highness' support, I'll definitely be promoted to the next level. This is a good thing. So why are you looking so down?" Carol's asked with a smile. Elijah was a little hesitant. "Tell me, what's there to hide from Father? Did you take a fancy to some girl tonight?" Carol's chuckled as he looked at Elijah. He was only 18 years old, and his son was already a grown man. Elijah scratched his head with a sheepish expression as he said, It's that young Mistress Gloria from Family Moraton that I saw at the banquet tonight. I was thinking, if we're going to leave Chaos City in half a month, would you be able to propose marriage to her on my behalf? My son has good taste. Miss Gloria is indeed a dignified and beautiful lady." Carol's nodded with a smile. Miss Gloria had left a deep impression on everyone tonight, including him. If such a dignified and beautiful young mistress could become a member of the Earhart family, it would be a glorious thing. Although the family Moraton wasn't a powerful family, its reputation had also risen with the rise of the Aden Chamber of Commerce's status on the Norland continent. Although it still couldn't compare to the Buffett family Moraton, its wealth was still limitless. Elaine's eyes immediately lit up as she looked at Carol's with anticipation in her eyes. Carol's patted family Moraton's shoulder with a smile and said, "Just you wait. I'll go to the family Moraton in a few days to propose marriage on your behalf." President Jeffrey and I are old acquaintances, and the family Moraton has always wanted to expand their business in the Roth Empire. I'm sure they'll make the right choice. Nonsense. There's no way the system would steal wine. At most, I took some soil from the Romani winery in Burgundy, France, and did some research on it. I used the mineral elements and composition of the soil to create a grape plantation on the Isle of France. After that, I crossbred the Pinot Noir grapes with the grapes of this world, and selected the Pinot Noir No. 2, which was the most plump and large grape. I then selected the most perfect grape with a 95% elimination rate to make wine. After optimizing the winemaking process, not only did it increase the production efficiency of the wine, it also improved the quality of the wine. Even though it hasn't been in the cellar for very long, its texture has completely surpassed that of the wines from the Romani winery. Furthermore, as long as it's properly preserved, it can be stored for over 300 years. The system's vexed voice was tinged with a hint of smugness. Meg rolled his eyes, but as he stared at the red wine in his glass, his eyes became brighter and brighter. "You're such a good-for-nothing. You even stole other people's soil. The soil you created that has no spirituality when eaten." The Romani winery was the best winery in France, and also the best winery in the world. It had a long history of several hundred years, and the average annual production was only 6,000 bottles. It was practically priceless on the market. Even Meg could only get his hands on 1 or 2 bottles a year in his previous life. Moreover, his grandfather would take away 1 bottle. Thus, he knew quite a bit about this extremely famous and high-quality red wine. "Wait." Meg held the glass and was about to taste the wine that the system said surpassed the Romani winery, when the system's voice suddenly sounded. Meg stopped, somewhat puzzled. "Host, this red wine can only be used as an ingredient for the black pepper steak. It cannot be drunk on its own, nor can it be sold directly," the system sternly warned. "System, how much do you want to sell this barrel of wine that has been stored for less than a year as an ingredient?" Meg put down the glass and asked inwardly. "This barrel of wine is enough for the host to make 1,000 servings of steak." The selling price is 100,000 copper coins, the system quickly replied. Okay, you can deduct 100,000 copper coins directly. We'll sell the wine by the barrel in the future, Meg said in a forthright manner. No bargaining this time, the system probed. Fixed price, Meg said somewhat absent-mindedly. Ding. The transaction is successful. 100,000 copper coins have been deducted. The system's somewhat cheerful voice sounded. Okay, the deal is done. This barrel of wine now belongs to me. Meg's face revealed a smile, and he raised the glass again. Just from the aroma of the wine, the system's words before were not bragging. This wine was indeed comparable to the Romani Conti winery, and such a large barrel of wine only cost 100,000 copper coins. He had simply picked up a treasure. In his previous life, any bottle of vintage Romani Conti would be auctioned off for 100,000 copper coins. If he met someone who liked wine, there would be no limit to how much he could bid. Host, this is a serious violation of the rules. It will trigger. The system's anxious voice sounded. Don't worry, I promise not to sell this wine. Apart from cooking, I won't use it for profit. Meg curled his lips and interrupted the system's words. He raised the glass and took a sip of the wine. After entering his mouth, there was a soft strawberry taste, and he could feel the texture of the soil. The texture was strong, dense, and complex. It glided through the tongue and throat without the slightest bit of irritation. It was soft and harmonious, sweet and rich. Chapter 662. Meg had tasted many fine wines in his life, including Romani Conti, Petrus, Chateau Lafite. However, none of those wines, which were renowned for their exceptional quality and exorbitant prices, paled in comparison to the small glass of wine in his hand. The aroma of roses and all types of fruits wafted through the air, making it difficult for one to grasp, but also difficult to resist. The texture of the Pinot Noir grapes was still very clear, but there was another unique aroma mixed within. It was this aroma that immediately set this wine apart from Romani Conti, making it a completely different type of wine. After swallowing the wine, his body began to heat up slightly, perhaps due to the alcohol or some other reason. Meg felt as if he were in a winery. There were large black grapes hanging from the grape trellis, and the faint aroma of wine wafted from the wine cellar off to the side. A series of oak barrels filled with red wine were stacked together, silently awaiting tasting. After a long while, Meg slowly opened his eyes and stared at the wine glass in his hand with amazement in his eyes. In terms of texture and quality alone, this wine had completely surpassed Romani Conti. However, in terms of mellow texture, the fact that it hadn't been in the cellar for long periods of time was a small flaw, but the exceptional quality of the wine made up for that flaw. It's a bit wasteful to use wine like this to make steak, Meg murmured to himself as he put down the wine glass in his hand. If such a fine wine were to become famous, it would definitely fetch a higher price than Romani Conti at auctions in his past life. If anyone in his past life were to suggest using Romani Conti to make steak, they would most likely be beaten to death by all the wine lovers in the world. Host, using the best ingredients to make the best food is the most basic pursuit of a god of cookery. You have to put away such petty thoughts. Only then will you have a chance to become a true god of cookery. The system's excited voice sounded. Then why don't you give me a discount of 1 copper coin per serving of wine? That won't happen. Not a single copper coin less. The system replied in a stern voice. You sure are generous. Meg pursed his lips. He pulled out 3 steaks from the fridge and began to cook them. This steak came from an iron-hide bull, and Meg could basically deduce that it came from the same herd of bulls as the beef kebab. As such, there was a significant reduction in the wastage of ingredients, and the quality of the steak was superior to that of the beef being served at the banquet. The 3 sets of steak set meals were ready in no time. Meg laid out the dishes deftly. A piece of steak with black pepper sauce was placed on a blue and white porcelain plate, and the side was decorated with colorful side dishes. It was very beautiful. It smells so good. Barbara looked in the direction of the kitchen, and her throat moved. The rich aroma of steak wafted out from the kitchen. Unlike the slightly pungent aroma of the roast beef kebab, this aroma was much softer, but it didn't weaken in the slightest. It was accompanied by a hint of alcohol, and it was almost intoxicating. No, I can't show that I want to eat too much. I have to maintain my dignity as a princess, Babla thought to herself as she tried her best to retract her gaze. However, her stomach couldn't help but grumble. She had just fainted from hunger and had regained some energy after drinking the sugar water. Now that she was stimulated by the rich aroma of the steak, she couldn't help but feel empty. All she wanted now was a large piece of steak to fill her empty stomach. Is someone's stomach growling? Amy looked around. It's it. Barbara immediately pointed at Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling, didn't you already eat a lot for dinner? Why is your stomach growling now? You can't do this. You're going to become a ball. Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling with a serious expression. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at Amy with an aggrieved expression and tried to explain. No need to explain. Run 10 laps around the restaurant first, Amy said with a serious expression as she placed Ugly Duckling on the ground. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked at Barbara with a resentful expression before reluctantly running around the restaurant. Barbara looked up at the chandelier and heaved a faint sigh of relief. She had finally managed to preserve her dignity as a princess. Grumble. Her stomach growled again, and Barbara's expression changed slightly. She picked up the glass of water on the table and took a small sip, trying her best to pretend that it didn't have anything to do with her. Amy looked around curiously again. All right, the black pepper steak is here. Meg walked out of the kitchen with 3 servings of steak and placed them in front of Barbara and Amy. He then took off his apron and sat down. There was also a steak in front of him that he hadn't tasted yet. Wow, it smells so good, and it looks so good. Amy's eyes lit up as she was drawn to the steak in front of her. Barbara heaved an internal sigh of relief, but her gaze was also quickly drawn to the steak in front of her. The entire steak was brownish-brown and was about the size of an adult's palm. There were long lines on the steak, and there were specks of oil glistening on the surface of the steak. The thick sauce was giving off a peculiar aroma, and it made one's mouth water uncontrollably. The aroma of the beef mixed with the fragrance of the red wine wafted over, and it was almost intoxicating. In contrast to the dull and heavy color of the steak, the vegetables beside the steak were brightly colored. There were colorful chili peppers and green vegetables that looked like flowers. Such a wonderful combination instantly lit up the blue and white porcelain plate. Will a whole piece of beef really taste good? Barbara was a little doubtful and expectant, but looking at the large steak in front of her, she didn't know how to eat it. If she reached out and grabbed it directly, it would be a little unsightly, but if she used chopsticks, it would be inconvenient. She was caught in a dilemma for a moment. You know how to eat steak, right? Meg asked Barbara. Of course I know. Barbara braced herself and said, but she still didn't eat. She glanced at Meg and Amy from the corner of her eyes. If the enemy didn't move, she wouldn't move. Following their method of eating was definitely not wrong. That's good. Meg nodded and reached out to take Amy's plate. Then, he picked up the knife and fork and helped her cut the steak into small pieces that were just right for her to eat. So you're going to cut it open. Barbara's eyes lit up, and her gaze fell on the knife and fork beside her. She picked up the knife and fork like Meg, pressed the fork against the steak, and cut it open. The knife easily cut open the tender beef, and the mellow aroma of the wine and the strong aroma of the beef instantly blossomed, making Barbara's eyes even brighter. Chapter 663. Blood, Blood, Blood. Barbara suddenly felt dizzy. Her body swayed, and she was about to fall to the side. What's wrong? Meg hurriedly reached out to support her shoulder. He looked at the pink steak in the middle and the red gravy hanging from it, and a strange expression appeared on his face as he asked, "Don't tell me you're scared of blood?" Barbara looked away from the steak and took 2 deep breaths. Her expression eased slightly, and she stubbornly shook her head as she said, "I'm not scared of blood. I'm just feeling a little uncomfortable. Your steak is medium rare, and the middle is slightly pink. The red gravy isn't blood, but gravy. It won't have a strong bloody taste, and it's good for your body. If you're really scared of blood, you can swap with me. Meg withdrew his hand and looked at Barbara. This girl's illness seemed to be a little more serious than he had expected. No need. I'm not scared of blood. Barbara shook her head resolutely. She looked down at the steak on the plate and picked up the small piece of beef that she had just cut. She closed her eyes and put it into her mouth. The expected situation of her mouth being full of blood and the smell of blood didn't appear. Instead, she bit into the tender beef, and the mellow aroma of wine and the tender gravy of the beef flowed out first. Coupled with the special aromatic sauce, it instantly ignited all of her taste buds. It was as if there were little fairies dancing on the tip of her tongue, and her furrowed brows couldn't help but loosen. She chewed carefully. The beef was so tender and plump. After being soaked in red wine, there wasn't the slightest bit of rank odor, and the original flavor of the beef was perfectly preserved. At this moment, a slightly sweet smell of blood wafted out from the beef. It wasn't the usual nauseating smell of blood that she usually smelled. This slightly sweet taste added another layer to the flavor of the steak, and she had an urge to lick it. Barbara felt as if she were soaking in a large bathtub. Her body was surrounded by red liquid, and the rich aroma of red wine was accompanied by a hint of blood. This strange scene made her feel so comfortable that she wanted to moan. Streams of heat flowed down his throat and into his stomach, then spread to his limbs and bones. It was as comfortable as soaking in a bathtub, and a part of it was concentrated on her chest. She didn't know how to describe the warm feeling, but it was indeed very comfortable. Babla could clearly feel her weak body quickly regaining its strength. If the sugar soup from before was just an appetizer, then this steak would be the main course. This steak is as delicious as kebabs. Even though it's a completely different flavor, it's not inferior to roast beef kebabs in terms of taste. After swallowing a piece of beef, Barbara opened her eyes and looked at the steak in front of her with surprise. After tasting this delicious steak, Bloodline, who felt dizzy just by looking at it, suddenly felt less disgusted. Instead, she felt tempted. Without any hesitation, Barbara cut another piece of beef and put it into her mouth. The delicious taste spread wildly in her mouth, and the emptiness in her body was constantly filled. The dizziness also disappeared. What a strange feeling. It's not inferior to roast beef at all, and I don't know if it's because of the bloodline, but I feel like the blood in my body is flowing faster, as if it's being replenished. Also, there's a strange feeling in my chest. Barbara carefully sensed the changes in her body. She was completely immersed in the delicious taste, and the large piece of steak quickly disappeared. Meg shook his head with a smile. She said she didn't want it, but her body was very honest. He placed the medium-well steak in front of Amy, and also picked up a knife and fork to cut a piece of beef. The medium-well steak was cooked to perfection. The stripes on the iron plate were perfectly imprinted on the steak, making it look more artistic. The steak knife cut into the steak, and one could clearly feel the juices of the meat flowing out, mixed with the rich aroma of red wine. This is probably the most expensive black pepper steak in the world, and only 100 milliliters of red wine was poured into it when it was marinated. Meg looked at the steak on his fork and couldn't help but praise it in his heart. Even he had never thought of using Romani Conti to make steak. As the beef entered his mouth, the taste of the black pepper took the brunt of the flavor, and his taste buds danced with joy. The other spices in the sauce neutralized much of the black pepper's irritation, leaving behind a slightly numbing texture and a strong and unique aroma. It was like a catalyst that pushed the flavors of red wine and beef toward the final fusion. The beef was very tender, and the juices of the meat and red wine flowed out of the beef, creating an indescribable taste. What an incredible flavor! This is a true top-notch steak. Meg's eyes completely lit up. He had eaten steak from many top-notch restaurants in his past life, but none of them could compare to this one. It shouldn't be too much to set the price at 1,500 copper coins, right? Meg thought to himself. The cost of ingredients for a steak like this was 300 copper coins, But Meg felt like 5,000 copper coins was already a bargain. There was no way such top-notch red wine could be sold outside, and the steak was also extremely delicious. Even though the red wine was very rich, Meg had already confirmed with the system that most of the alcohol had been used during the frying of the steak. Furthermore, the black pepper and other spices wouldn't have any special effects on children, but they would have a negative effect on women and puberty girls. As for the effects on men, the system's answer was a little ambiguous, but it guaranteed that there wouldn't be any negative effects. The restaurant was very quiet, and the only sound that could be heard was the sound of the cutlery clanking against the plates, as well as the three of them exclaiming in amazement. Meow, Ugly Duckling had finished its 10 laps, and it was squatting at Amy's feet, looking up at Amy with an expectant expression. "All right, seeing as you've finished your 10 laps, I'll give you a small piece of beef." Amy looked down at Ugly Duckling as she placed a small piece of beef in her hand, and bent down to offer it to Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling's eyes lit up, and it placed its front paws on Amy's feet before sticking its little head out to take the piece of beef. It landed on the ground, and began chewing happily with a joyful expression on its face. Meow, 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 however. Not long after Ugly Duckling ate the piece of beef, its body began to sway slightly, and it began to circle around the table frantically as if it had suddenly gone mad. "Father, what's wrong with Ugly Duckling?" Amy asked with a surprised expression as she looked at Ugly Duckling, which was circling around the table. "Maybe it has a cat disease?" Meg raised an eyebrow as he looked at Ugly Duckling, which had suddenly begun to circle around the table frantically, with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Thump! Ugly Duckling's head crashed into the corner of the table, and it lay on the ground with stars in its eyes, already fast asleep. Chapter 664. Commander, this is a report that we just received from Chaos City. In a campsite in a valley, a black-robed man quickly strode into the centermost tent and handed a long bamboo tube with a seal on it to Seuss. Seuss undid the seal on the bamboo tube and pulled out the letter within, upon which his brows gradually furrowed. All of the black-robed men in the tent immediately tensed up, and all of them turned to look at Seuss. "Pack up and set off for Chaos City tonight," Seuss said with a gloomy expression as a ball of black flame ignited. The letter and bamboo tube were burned to ashes in Seuss's hand. Have the cheetahs discovered anything recently? At the border of the Roth Empire, Sean was looking at a map hanging on the wall in a large military tent. "We've received some news, Your Highness, but it's all been proven to be false. We still haven't found any traces of Alex," Quinn said in a low voice. However, Bertley, who's been keeping an eye on Lewis, hasn't returned with a report this month. I've already sent people to verify it, but we don't know what the reason is for this. Louis XVI? Sean's brows furrowed as he recalled the saber-wielding knight who had followed Alex all those years ago. Bertley had always been extremely loyal to Alex. Sean turned to Quinn and said, "It's very unlikely that this person saved Alex, but if Bertley has mysteriously disappeared, then we still have to investigate this matter. Situations like this haven't happened often in recent years." "Yes." Quinn nodded in response. "Did you receive any news from Josh?" Sean asked with a curious look on his face. "According to the report from our spy in Azura, they most likely haven't found Alex yet, either. Seuss has most likely gone to Chaos City with his men, and this news was only received 10 days ago," Quinn replied. "Interesting. He was able to make the entire continent know where he was back then, and now he's able to make the entire continent not know where he is. Alex's abilities really can't be underestimated." Sean chuckled coldly. Quinn lowered his head even further and didn't say anything. "I'm going back to Rodu to celebrate His Majesty's birthday in 15 days. Have you gathered all the things I asked you to find?" Sean's smile faded as he looked at Quine. "Everything has been prepared. I've already ordered people to keep an eye on the pharmacists and start refining the longevity pills," Kane replied. After hesitating for a moment, he still said, "Your Highness, there's something I don't understand." "Speak," Sean said calmly. Right now, His Highness' influence in the military is unparalleled. The 7 armies of the northern region are all battle-hardened armies, and they're all under His Highness' command. If His Majesty were to abdicate, even if he were to pass the throne to the second prince, the magic casters of the Magus Tower wouldn't be able to defend against the armies of the northern region. However, Ugly Duckling still didn't react in the slightest. It was like a drunken cat. It's probably drunk. Let's let it wake up naturally tomorrow. Meg took the plates to the kitchen and washed them in the dishwasher before coming out to look at Amy, who was still trying to wake Ugly Duckling up. All right, then I'll take it to bed, Amy said with a resigned expression. Then, she grabbed Ugly Duckling's tail and dragged it upstairs. Meg looked at Ugly Duckling, who was dragged up the stairs with its face on the smooth floor, and couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. As expected, regardless of whether it was a human or a cat, one had to exercise some restraint when it came to drinking. Otherwise, it would end up in a terrible state. After taking a bath, he placed Ugly Duckling, which Amy had complained about, on a chair nearby. Meg coaxed Amy to sleep and then lay down on the bed himself. He opened the ice cream cake experience bag and entered the test field for the god of cookery. Ice cream cake could become an expanded product for ice cream. This world still had the concept of birthdays, so it would be a good market if he could make people develop the habit of eating birthday cakes. Meg felt that there was no better way to market this market than to present a huge cake to the king of the Roth Empire on his birthday. Meg felt like his way of thinking was becoming more and more like a businessman. Not long after Amy and Meg fell asleep, orange light suddenly appeared on Ugly Duckling's body, which was lying on its back on the soft chair. Its body was like a balloon that had been inflated, and it slowly became rounder and bigger. A pair of white wings sprouted from its back, and they flapped gently. The round orange ball slowly floated up and circled around the room. Ugly Duckling, whose eyes were still closed, suddenly sneezed. It was like a balloon that had been punctured by a needle, and it rapidly leaked air. It flew around the room, and then plunged into the little bed. Meow? Chapter 665. Dean Hayter, I'm sorry to disturb you so late at night. In front of an old courtyard covered with creepers, Hill looked at Hayter apologetically. How could that be? Miss Hill has always supported our research. Of course, such a small matter is not a problem. Hayter hurriedly waved his hand. He looked at Hill and hesitated for a moment before saying, But Miss Hill asked those questions just now. Does it mean that someone has already developed a steam engine? I'm not sure about this yet. If I get the exact information, I'll inform you as soon as possible, Hill said with a smile. Okay, if someone has really developed a steam engine, that's also something to be happy about. Hayter nodded with a smile. Hill looked at Hayter and said with some puzzlement, Dean, you've been researching and experimenting for so many years. If someone has already developed a steam engine, won't you feel sad? Why would I feel sad? We've been researching this for many years, but we haven't been able to make any breakthroughs. Mr. Mag did give us some suggestions not long ago, but we're still very far from being able to produce a usable product. If someone can produce a steam engine now, then that would be a massive breakthrough and something worthy of celebration. Heidel shook his head with a smile. Dean, if you have any research topics in the future and need funds, you can come to me. Hill also smiled and nodded slightly. Then I'll thank Miss Hill first. Hayter smiled and nodded. Then I'll take my leave first. Hill got into the carriage, and the coachman drove the carriage slowly away. If someone has really developed a steam engine, it proves that our efforts over the years were not wrong. I just don't know who has developed it. When Miss Hill sends back the news, I must go and ask for advice. Hayter stood at the door and said to himself, This is a real researcher. I hope Mr. Meg didn't use the things they've been researching for many years to fool me. Hill whispered to herself as she looked at the curtain of the carriage. Moreton Manor, in a study filled with account books on wooden shelves. Cyril looked at Geoffrey, who was being helped by the housekeeper to change his clothes. His expression was somewhat agitated as he said, "Father, that damned girl Gloria colluded with Mr. Hill at the banquet today and made family Moreton lose face. Furthermore, she made the decision to donate without permission and completely disregarded the family property. Moreover, today, she and Meg behaved indecently and protected each other. I'm afraid that they have an improper relationship. I don't think she's suitable to continue being the successor of family Moreton and the owner of the Suede Textiles store." Pa! A loud and clear slap resounded in the room. The butler held the clothes with both hands and walked out briskly, closing the door of the study on the way. Geoffrey withdrew his trembling hand and looked at the red handprint on Cyril's face. Cyril had to lean on the desk beside him to prevent himself from falling, and he asked with a cold expression, "Do you know why I hit you?" Cyril clasped a hand over his face and was struck by a sense of dizziness. Geoffrey had rarely hit him in his entire life, but he felt as if he had been plunged into an icy abyss upon hearing Geoffrey's words. He lowered his eyes and didn't dare to reply. Today, the one who made family Moreton lose face wasn't Gloria, but you, a useless fellow. Instead, it was her who saved some face for family Moreton. At least they wouldn't think that our family Moreton doesn't have a successor. You're her second uncle, yet you dare to say such insulting words to her. If you're not suitable to continue as the successor, I think we should reconsider you," Geoffrey said with a cold expression. Cyril's expression changed drastically, and he immediately knelt down onto the ground. He latched onto Geoffrey's leg and sobbed as he said, "Father, I know I was wrong. Please give me another chance. I really know I was wrong. Get lost." Geoffrey lifted his leg and kicked Cyril to the ground. His expression was cold as he said, "I started my business when I was 12 years old. I've been careful with my words and actions all along the way. That's how I built our family business. You don't think about making progress and only know how to enjoy life. You listen to slander and create trouble. Sooner or later, you'll ruin our family business." "Father, I'll change. I'll definitely change. From today onwards, I'll definitely change. I'll no longer cause trouble and interact with those scoundrels. I know I was wrong. I know I was wrong." Cyril's face was pale as he crawled up. He didn't dare to hug Geoffrey's leg anymore. He knelt on the ground and slapped himself as he spoke in a tearful voice. Geoffrey looked at Cyril with a cold expression, and only after Cyril had almost slapped himself to the point where his face was swollen did he say in a cold voice, "You'd better remember what I said today. If I hear that you're messing around again and sullying the reputation of Moreton Manor, I'll kick you out of Moreton Manor." "Yes, yes." Cyril nodded quickly and breathed a sigh of relief. "Don't be in such a hurry to be happy. This isn't over yet." Geoffrey sneered. He pulled out a thick account book from the first shelf of the bookshelf and slammed it on the table. "This is the backup account book of the operations of the few shops that you've been in charge of over the past few years. Do you think that you can fool me by changing the account book? What you don't know is that the accountant keeps 2 copies of the account book. I won't argue with you about how much money you've taken from these businesses over the years, but from today onwards, I'll take back all of these businesses, including your position as a director of the Chamber of Commerce." Carrie's blacksmith shop has been doing pretty well over the past 2 years. I'll give you 20 days to make this shop start making a profit. If the blacksmith shop has more money than the Suede Textiles shop in 20 days, I'll return those things to you. If the Suede Textiles shop has more money, then those things will belong to Gloria. Cyril's expression was a bit unsightly, but when he saw Geoffrey's expression, he gritted his teeth and nodded. "Yes, don't try to play tricks. If you can't even compare to a woman, then you don't deserve to inherit the family Moreton." Geoffrey looked at Cyril with a hint of warning in his eyes before he turned and left. Gasp! Cyril clasped a hand over his cheek as he slowly rose to his feet. He propped himself up with both hands on the table and looked at the account book on the table with a twisted expression as he said, "Old man, you've never trusted me from the very beginning. Even that little girl, Sheer, has already inherited the Buffett family, yet you're still making me and a little girl compete for the position of successor. Princess, Phyllis ran into the spacious cave and saw Irina squatting under the tree of life with her back facing the cave. She seemed to be starting a fire. Phyllis stopped and took a sniff before asking curiously, "Princess, are you burning something?" "Yes, I'm making roast chicken. Alex loved my roast chicken the most. When I find them, I've decided to make them roast chicken every day," Irina replied with a serious expression as she held a branch in her hand. Chapter 666. Of course, I think little Amy would like it as well. Irina nodded with a matter-of-fact expression. "Have you tried this roast chicken before?" Phyllis asked. "No, I don't like roast chicken, so I've been buying it all this time." Irina shook her head as she looked at the roast chicken in her hand, then at Phyllis, and a smile gradually appeared on her face. "Princess, I've already had dinner," Phyllis hurriedly said as she sensed that Irina's smile was a little dangerous. "It's all right. You can eat it as a midnight snack now. You can't eat such delicious roast chicken anywhere else." Irina looked at Phyllis with a smile as she handed the roast chicken in her hand over to her. "There's really no need for that. I'm still very full. Besides, if I eat something at night, I'll gain weight easily." Phyllis shook her head firmly as she reflexively took a few steps back. She really didn't know how to eat this roast chicken, and she didn't know how Master Alex was able to taste this delicious roast chicken. Before Phyllis had a chance to finish her sentence, a chicken drumstick had already been stuffed into her mouth. Phyllis felt as if she had bitten into a piece of charcoal with too much salt added to it. Even though it was only a single bite, it had already completely refreshed her understanding of food. This was not something that elves could stomach. Is it really that bad? Alex really liked this roast chicken back then. Irina looked at Phyllis, who was gargling with dew in her hands, and hesitated momentarily before breaking off the other chicken drumstick and taking a bite. Phyllis stood off to the side and looked on in silence. "Erg, this is not something that elves should eat." Irina tossed the chicken drumstick out of the cave before taking a few large gulps of water from Phyllis's cup. She looked at the roast chicken in her hand with a complex expression as she said, "I didn't think that Alex would have such a strong taste. Back then, I thought that he had fallen in love with my little fresh." "I think there's a very good chance that Master Alex has fallen in love with your little fresh," Phyllis said. "Bean Sprout, why did you cover your heart when you said that?" Irina looked at Phyllis suspiciously. "That's right. Your Highness, I'm here to report an important piece of news to you." Phyllis's eyes lit up, and her voice rose a few octaves. Did Snare send back news?" Irina's eyes lit up. Phyllis took 2 steps forward, lowered her body and said, "No, it's about a new batch of captured elves. They will arrive at the border of the Wind Forest in 3 days." Irina's expression immediately turned cold. She clenched her fists and said, "That old witch Helena still refuses to give up on this matter even after so many years. Since they're unwilling to come back, what right does she have to capture them with demons and orcs?" "Princess, are you going to make a move this time?" Phyllis looked at Irina worriedly. "We've missed it so many times before. Are we still going to sit back and do nothing this time? That's not like me." Irina chuckled coldly. "But you've only just recovered, and the Elven naturalization plan was approved by Her Majesty. If you make a move, Helena most likely won't hold back any longer. If she gathers all of the major families to attack you, your situation will become even more dire," Phyllis said in an urgent manner. "This problem was no longer a problem for me 5 years ago." Irina shrugged nonchalantly as she flicked Phyllis's forehead with a smile and said, "All right, I'm hungry. Go get me some good food." "Ouch, that hurts." Phyllis slapped a hand over her forehead as she glowered at Irina before making her way out of the cave. No one could change the princess' decision. In the past, she had thought that Master Alex would be able to change her mind, but it looked like that was impossible. Those bastards actually dared to stir up trouble and bully the elves again. Looks like they've all forgotten about my existence. Irina chuckled coldly as her gaze fell on the unroasted pheasant beside her, and a conflicted expression appeared on her face. Does Alex really like roasted pheasant? But would little AI me like to eat it? Perhaps I should make some improvements for them. The next morning, Meg turned off the alarm as soon as it rang. Meg sat up and stretched lazily. Even though he had spent most of the night making ice cream cakes in the test field for the god of cookery, he had rested very well, and his entire body was brimming with energy. He took a look at Ugly Duckling, who was hanging dangerously by the bedsheet with only one paw left, and Meg got up to give it a hand. However, right at this moment, Amy, who was still asleep, turned around and kicked Ugly Duckling in the face with her little pink foot. Meow! Ugly Duckling let loose a cry of despair and fell off the bed. It rolled over a couple of times before coming to a stop and sat down on the ground with a resentful expression. Meg shook his head with a smile. This was happening almost every day, and he couldn't be bothered to deal with it. He got up and changed his clothes, and after washing up, he went downstairs to prepare the ingredients for the morning service. This morning, Meg was preparing to release steak as a new dish in the restaurant. However, Meg wasn't going to release the ice cream cake yet. Instead, he was going to save it for when he went a rodeo. This was a perfect combination of cake and ice cream. Not only could customers experience the cool sensation of the ice cream, but they could also taste the smooth texture of the cake. There was no way it wouldn't be a hit. As he prepared the ingredients, Meg thought about the meeting he was going to have with the Hill. This could be a fateful meeting. The restaurant's business was already on track, but compared to the high price of the strength points, the daily income was still a drop in the bucket. This was one of the reasons why Meg had taken the risk to create the steam engine. However, aside from the massive profits that could be reaped, Meg had an even more important consideration for the steam engine. That was how to tie the Buffett family and Chaos City together with him. He didn't want to repeat what had happened 3 years ago. As such, he had to make a change that was different from Alex's. Thus, it was undoubtedly a good way to make one of the wealthiest families and the most powerful forces in the world endorse him. Father, look, Ugly Duckling has a pair of little wings on its back. Chapter 667. It has wings now? Meg looked at Amy, who was standing at the entrance of the kitchen with Ugly Duckling in her arms, and a hint of surprise appeared on his face. Yes, yes. Look, the 2 tufts of fur on its back have turned white, and they look like a pair of little wings, Amy said as she pointed at Ugly Duckling's back. Meg put down the kitchen knife in his hand and made his way to the entrance of the kitchen. Ugly Duckling, which was in Amy's arms, still seemed to be a little sleepy, and it snuggled up against Amy's chest before closing its eyes comfortably. On its back, 2 tufts of white fur had appeared, and upon closer inspection, they really did look like a pair of little white wings. They were symmetrical on both sides, and they looked quite adorable. They do look like little wings. Meg nodded. These little white wings that had suddenly appeared on Ugly Duckling's back were indeed a little strange. Could it be that it had evolved after eating the steak with red wine the night before? I knew it wasn't a kitten, but an ugly duckling. When it grows up, it'll become a beautiful white swan. Amy said with elation. She looked down at Ugly Duckling in her arms and licked her lips as she said, when that time comes, I'll, meow. All of Ugly Duckling's fur immediately stood on end, and it looked up at Amy with a fearful expression as it shook its head. It's all right, it's all right. You're still young, so we'll talk about this when you grow up. A smile appeared on Amy's face again as she gently stroked Ugly Duckling's head. Meow! Ugly Duckling closed its eyes comfortably and nestled in Amy's arms again. Could it be some kind of mutated demon beast? Meg reached out to touch the 2 little wings on Ugly Duckling's back. The white fur was slightly harder than the other fur, and it was arranged in layers like a bird's wings. However, there was nothing unusual about the white fur. and there were no fleshy wings, either. Father, will Ugly Duckling be able to fly when it grows up? Amy asked as she looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes. If it's really an ugly duckling, it'll be able to fly when it grows up. Meg nodded with a smile. The herb gatherers had picked up the egg from the cliff, and now, Ugly Duckling had grown some wing-like feathers on its back. Even Meg wasn't sure what it would become when it grew up. However, what was certain was that they had found a treasure. Great. Although the roast goose is delicious, I can consider riding it into the sky to play when it grows up. Amy's eyes lit up, as if she had just made a very difficult decision. That's a good idea. Meg smiled and nodded. Then Amy, go wash up first. Father will help you braid your hair later. All right. Amy nodded obediently before carrying Ugly Duckling upstairs. Did you hear? Mr. Mack had a duel with head chef Beat from Dukas Restaurant at the Aden Chamber of Commerce's banquet last night. Harrison was standing in the long line outside the restaurant, and he was drinking with a friend the night before, and he had heard something interesting. How was it? Who won? All of the customers were immediately intrigued upon hearing that. Head Chef Beat was the most renowned chef in Chaos City. That goes without saying. Boss Mag won, of course. I was present at the banquet last night, and Mr. Mack completely won over the city lord, the president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce, and young Mistress Hill with a black pepper steak. A man in a lavish robe said with a smile. Mr. Mack beat Head Chef Beat. A commotion immediately erupted outside the restaurant. Of course, most of them were elated. It was as if something that one was most proud of had finally won the approval of the public. However, they were also a little concerned that if something like this were to become known by too many people, it would no longer belong to them. It was a very complex feeling. Steak? I don't recall seeing something like that on Amy's menu. Could it be that Mr. Mack is releasing a new dish? It must be an extremely delicious dish to be able to win the approval of the city lord and the president of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. I wonder if Mr. Mack is going to release a new dish today. All of the customers were looking forward to seeing this. The roast beef kebabs had just given everyone a pleasant surprise not too long ago, and they were all wondering what kind of surprise this new dish would bring. Boss, we heard that you beat Head Chef Beat last night. Is that true? Yabamiya turned to Meg with an incredulous look on her face as soon as she walked into the restaurant. The head chef of Dukas Restaurant, Head Chef Beat, was widely acknowledged as one of the top chefs in Chaos City. She had once viewed him as her idol, but he had lost to Meg in a chef's competition. In Yabamiya's heart, Meg also held an extremely high status and had already surpassed Head Chef Beat. However, she was still unable to repress her astonishment at this outcome. Sally was also looking at Meg with a hint of surprise in her eyes. She was the first customer of Amy's, so she was well aware of the efforts that Meg had made to elevate Amy's from a small restaurant with only one dish on the menu to a restaurant that was so popular with its customers. That's right. Father cooked a super delicious steak last night, and he won. Before Meg had a chance to say anything, Amy nodded and said, If you don't believe me, you can ask Big Sister Barbara. She also ate it. The steak was very delicious. Although it wasn't easy for her to praise others, she was still capable of being honest. All right, I'll give you that, said Babla as she nodded slightly. The restaurant is going to release a new dish today. It's the black pepper steak. If you want to try it, I can make breakfast for you, Meg said with a smile. Sharing his joy made him even happier. After defeating Beat the night before, he had obtained a store, as well as a group of wealthy potential customers. This was undoubtedly going to be extremely beneficial to the development of the restaurant. I also want to eat beef and 2 tofu puddings. Amy was the first to raise her hand. Then I'll also get a steak. I think it'll be very delicious. Yabamiya also raised her hand. I'll also get a steak. Sally nodded in response. I'll have it medium rare. Barbara was a little hesitant. All right, Steak and tofu pudding. What an interesting combination. Meg smiled as he made his way into the kitchen. When is this suede going to open? I've been waiting for almost half an hour. Chapter 668. There was already a long line at the entrance of the blue suede clothing store, and the people in the line were all noblewomen dressed in splendid attire. It was as if they were going to attend a banquet, attracting the attention of passers-by. Although these noblewomen were smiling and greeting each other, the atmosphere wasn't as harmonious as it seemed. Everyone had heard that the dress that young Mistress Gloria had worn the day before was a limited edition dress. There was only one dress of each color, so there were at most a dozen or so dresses. There were already over 20 people lining up at the entrance, and the line was still getting longer and longer. No one knew who would be able to pick the most stunning dress. At this moment, everyone present was a competitor. A carriage slowly drove over from the distance. Gloria opened the curtain and walked out. When she saw the noblewomen standing at the entrance of the suede, she couldn't help but be slightly surprised. However, she quickly reacted and got out of the carriage. She smiled apologetically and said, "I didn't think that madams and young ladies would come so early. I've been neglectful." "How could that be? Miss Gloria already came very early. It's just that we were impatient and came even earlier," a noblewoman said with a smile. Her smile was very sincere. "Yes, but Miss Gloria, you said that we can order dresses today. Since there are so many of us here, can you make a few more dresses for us? At least let each of us get one," the noblewoman at the end of the line said. She looked a little nervous. She thought that she had arrived early, but she didn't expect that these people would already line up in the time it took to put on makeup. "Thank you for your understanding, but the number of dresses will be determined by the color. If there is a color that everyone likes, then it would be best. If it's a pity that there isn't any, our store has 2 other dresses that are also very good. Madams and young ladies can also try them." Gloria slightly shook her head. She had no intention of relenting on this matter. Mamie's had its own rules and principles, so it had a special place in the hearts of the customers. She wanted to make Suede into a clothing store like Mamie's, so she had to have principles and rules. Otherwise, these rich and meddlesome ladies would become the biggest trouble in the future. Gloria learned from Meg that she shouldn't spoil her guests. "I see." When the madams heard this, their faces were filled with disappointment and joy. They were disappointed because they didn't think that they would be able to choose a color that they liked, while they were elated because according to Gloria, as long as they could choose a dress, there wouldn't be a second dress in Chaos City that was of the same color as hers. Being unique was what they valued the most. "Madams, please come in. We'll choose the dresses according to the order of the queue." Gloria said with a smile. She knocked on the door and said a few words to the person inside. The closed door was soon opened, and a waitress with dark circles under her eyes came out to greet them. She then led them into the restaurant. In the kitchen, Meg was frying a steak with a serious expression, and the aroma of beef wafted out of the kitchen. Yabamiya took a deep sniff, and her eyes shone with concern as she said, "It smells so good, but I don't drink alcohol. If boss uses alcohol to cook steak, will I get drunk after eating it?" "Ugly Duckling got drunk after just a small bite last night," Amy said as she stroked Ugly Duckling's head. "Is it that bad?" Yabamiya's eyes widened with a conflicted expression as she said, "My alcohol tolerance is about the same as Ugly Duckling's. If I get drunk after just one bite, then I won't be able to work later." "Am I that good at drinking?" Barbara was a little skeptical. She had eaten an entire steak the night before, but she didn't feel anything at all and had gone upstairs to sleep with a clear mind. It shouldn't be too big of a problem. Amy was fine even after eating it. Sally took a glance at Ugly Duckling, and her gaze fell on the pair of little wings on its back as she asked with a perplexed expression, Why is there a pair of little wings on its back? Yabamiya leaned over to take a closer look upon hearing that, and also asked with a curious expression, could it be that it's really going to become a swan in the future? It should be a magic beast from your world, right? I can't sense any magic power from its body, though. Barbara appraised Ugly Duckling with an appraising expression. Meow! Ugly Duckling let loose a fearful cry as it was being scrutinized by everyone, and it didn't dare to move in Amy's arms. Here's a black pepper steak. Meg made his way out of the kitchen with a tray and placed a portion of steak in front of everyone. Wow, it smells so good, and it's so delicious. Yabamiya stared at the steak in front of her with amazement on her face. The entire steak was placed on a plate with a vibrant side dish, and the rich aroma wafting through the air made her salivate involuntarily. This was the perfect combination of the aroma of beef and wine, as well as a unique aroma. This aroma was like a kitten that was constantly tugging at one's heartstrings, and it made one want to explore just what kind of delicious flavor was hidden within this steak. This aroma is so special. It's even richer than the wine brewed from the spring of life that Father loves. Even those who don't like to drink won't find it repulsive in the slightest. In this dish, it's like a type of spice that adds a unique flavor to the beef. Sally closed her eyes and took a deep sniff, upon which her eyes also lit up. I had a good sleep after eating this steak yesterday, and I feel like my body has become a little better after waking up this morning. It seems to be even more effective than roast beef kebabs. Perhaps I can test that out again today, Barbara thought to herself as she looked at the steak in front of her. Let's eat, Meg said with a smile as he picked up Amy's steak and prepared to cut it open for her. Father, Amy can do it herself. Teacher Luna told me that I have to do my own things, including eating, Amy said with a serious expression as she picked up her own knife and fork. She looked at Meg with a serious expression. Meg hesitated momentarily at the sight of Amy's serious expression before placing the steak back in front of Amy with a smile, and said, "All right, then Amy can eat it herself. Be careful when you use your knife and fork." Okay. Amy nodded with elation as she pressed down on the steak with her fork before carefully cutting it open with her knife. Meg sliced off a piece of beef and dipped it in the black pepper sauce before placing it into his mouth. His taste buds danced on the tip of his tongue as he tasted it. Yabamiya and Sally copied Meg and also sliced off a piece of beef before placing it into their mouths at almost the same time as Barbara. Oh, what delicious beef! Sally's eyes immediately lit up. After swallowing the beef, she felt a surge of heat surge toward her chest, which was even more incredible to her. This feeling, could it be that this steak actually has the effect of promoting puberty? Even though I'm still young, but it really does feel hot there. Barbara's eyes also lit up. Slash. Chapter 669. The sound of cloth tearing was very clear. Or rather, it was as if something had suddenly burst through the cloth. Everyone couldn't help but look at Yabamiya, who was sitting next to them. The buttons on the chest of her cute and sexy-made costume had burst open, revealing her fair and round breasts. Oh, her clothes burst open again. Meg's eyes lit up. Yabamiya's small body contained a big surprise, and the impact was quite strong. Sally and Barbara looked at Yabamiya's breasts, then looked down at their own bodies, and their expressions became a little complicated. They were both women, but why was she so outstanding? Oh, Yabamiya looked down at her exposed collar and froze for a moment. Her face quickly turned red, and she covered her collar with her hand. How could this be? It burst open again. Could it be that my breasts are really too big, and I feel like they're still growing? Yabamiya was so embarrassed that she didn't know what to say. The delicious taste was wreaking havoc in her mouth, and the swelling feeling in her chest was also very strong. Wow, Sister Yabamiya's little bunny is out again, Amy exclaimed. Then she looked at Sally and Barbara curiously and said, "But why don't Sister Sally and Sister Barbara have any?" Ahem. Sally and Barbara both coughed softly. They refused to answer such a hurtful question and continued to eat their steaks to make the stimulating feeling more intense. Well, you'll know when you grow up, Meg said a little awkwardly. As a father, he really didn't know how to educate his daughter about this kind of thing. If only her mother was here. Is that so? Okay then. Amy nodded and didn't ask any more questions. She continued to eat her steak. Yabamiya turned sideways and quickly buttoned up her collar. Her clothes had burst open when she had eaten Rugiamo for the first time. Because she was overwhelmed by the delicious taste, she didn't think that Meg did it on purpose. Other than her blushing face, she didn't show any other expression and continued to immerse herself in the delicious beef. It's so delicious. I didn't know that beef could be made so delicious. The delicious red wine and the tender beef are perfect. The taste is completely different from that of beef kebabs, but it's not inferior to beef kebabs at all, Yabamiya said with admiration as she put down her knife and fork. She looked at Meg with admiration. After finishing the steak, Sally closed her eyes and savored the aftertaste for a while before opening her eyes and saying, I think the flavor of this sauce is very special. It's a flavor that I've never tasted before, and it makes this steak so special. Sally, it's much better than the beef made by the best chefs in the Moon Nation, Barbara said after thinking for a while. Looks like we'll be able to sell a lot of steaks today. Meg said with a smile. He was very satisfied. For a chef, there was nothing happier and more satisfying than the recognition of the customers. Mr. Mack, I heard that you made a steak at the Aden Chamber of Commerce party last night. Is the restaurant going to release a new dish today? Harrison asked as soon as he entered the restaurant. The other customers were also looking at Meg with concern. Some of them were members of the Aden Chamber of Commerce who had seen Meg make a delicious steak last night. Yes, the restaurant is releasing a new dish today. Black pepper steak? Meg nodded with a smile. It seemed that the black pepper steak had already been advertised, so there was no need for additional promotion. Then I'll eat the black pepper steak today. Harrison's eyes lit up, and he said immediately, the city lord has tasted the black pepper steak, so of course he has to try it. Of course we have to support Mr. Mack's new dish. I also want a black pepper steak. The customers also began to place orders, and many of them ordered steaks. Please wait for a moment, Meg said with a smile. He quickly walked into the kitchen and began to cook. One delicious dish after another was brought out of the kitchen and placed in front of the customers. Not long after, the aroma of beef mixed with red wine wafted out of the kitchen and instantly attracted the attention of many customers. This is the aroma of red wine mixed with beef, but it seems to be even more fragrant than it was at the banquet yesterday. David was pleasantly surprised. He had been craving Meg's steak when he saw the judges try it the night before, so he came to line up early in the morning after finding out the location of Meg's restaurant. David owned 3 furniture stores in the Aden Square, and all of them specialized in custom-made high-end furniture. He had virtually monopolized the entire high-end furniture market in Chaos City, so he naturally had a place in the Aden Chamber of Commerce as well. However, he had never liked to compete with others for positions, so he had always refused to be elected as a board member. On one hand, he wanted to make a fortune in secret, and on the other hand, he couldn't be bothered to socialize. What he liked more was to find delicious restaurants, so he could be considered a glutton. When he was young, he often had to travel far to purchase wood and all types of ingredients. He had traveled almost all over the continent and had eaten in many places. As such, he had his own set of standards when it came to food, and no one could fool him. The cooking competition between Meg and Beat the night before had been a feast for his eyes. He didn't know much about Meg, but as a regular customer of Dukas restaurant, he knew a lot about Beat. Beat's culinary skills definitely ranked among the best in Chaos City. Even though there was still some distance between him and the top chefs in Rodu, he was already able to cook many dishes that even David was full of praise for. However, Meg was able to crush Beat with a single steak, and that was enough to demonstrate the disparity between the two of them. David didn't doubt the fairness of the judges in the slightest, and that was why he had woken up so early in the morning. In this world, delicious food was the only thing that couldn't be let down. However, even though he had woken up early in the morning, there were still many people who had arrived earlier than him in the long line outside the restaurant. "Here's your pepper steak, medium well." Yabamiya placed a steak in front of David with a smile on his face before turning to the next customer. "The presentation is even more exquisite than yesterday's, and this aroma isn't just a figment of my imagination. It's indeed richer than yesterday's. The difference between the two of them should be due to the red wine." David's eyes lit up at the sight of the steak in front of him, but a hint of surprise quickly appeared on his face as he said, "But the red wine that Mr. Mack used to cook the steak yesterday was borrowed from young Mistress Hill. That's the best red wine from Buffett Banks. Could there be a better red wine in this world?" David's heart was filled with bewilderment as he sliced off a piece of steak with his fork and knife. This flavor. Chapter 670. David had been to many places and tasted many delicacies in his life. Rodu was known as the place with the most delicious food on the entire Norland continent. He had stayed there for 3 years and tasted almost all of the famous restaurants there. However, the delicious food hidden in his memory seemed to be overshadowed at this moment. The mellow red wine and the tender and juicy beef fused together in a miraculous manner. This was an inconceivable delicacy, and the sauce was like a magic potion, completely igniting the taste buds in the mouth. David loved wine and would purchase a batch of wine from the Buffett winery every year. Even though it couldn't compare to the wine on the hill, it was still the best red wine on the Norland continent. However, the wine that he had to drink on a regular basis paled in comparison to the wine contained in this beef. The rich yet mild aroma was far superior to the wine in his home, and he was instantly hooked by it. When the steak had first been brought out, he had even felt that it was a pity that Meg had used such good red wine to cook. However, he had already cast that thought to the back of his mind. Only such delicious beef is worthy of such a good wine. Without such a good wine, there probably wouldn't be such delicious beef. Even the Yado restaurant wouldn't use such premium wine to cook, and even their head chef wouldn't be able to cook such delicious beef. I didn't think that I would be able to eat such delicious food in Chaos City. I really did come to the right place today. David was full of praise for the beef. The more he chewed, the more delicious it became. It was tender and juicy, and the texture was exquisite. After swallowing, his taste buds immediately began to rejoice, and he couldn't help but cut another piece into his mouth to satisfy his dissatisfaction. If I want to eat delicious food next time, I won't have to spend half a month to go to Rodu. I can just eat it right here in front of my house. David finished his steak with a content expression before turning to the other dishes on the menu. "This steak is so delicious. Please give me another one." "That's right. The price of 1,000 copper coins is completely worth it. Fresh ironhide bull beef, black pepper, which is even more expensive than gold. What's even better is that red wine. Just the seasoning used to cook the steak is of superb quality. It tastes even better than the wine from the Buffett winery that costs 10,000 copper coins per small bottle. Mr. Mack never disappoints me." The guests who had eaten the steak were full of praise. Meg, who was in the kitchen, had a smile on his face. To be able to make the customers willingly pay for their meals and feel that they had taken advantage of them, this kind of happiness was undoubtedly very strong. Of course, Meg also felt that they had taken advantage of the situation. With such ingredients and such a delicacy, if it were any other shop owner, they would be considered kind if they didn't charge 5,000 copper coins. After breakfast, Sally, Yabamiya, and Barbara cleaned up the restaurant. Meg told them that he was going to meet an important guest in the restaurant and asked Yabamiya and Sally to take Barbara out for a walk. He was the only one left in the restaurant. A lavish horse-drawn carriage stopped in front of the restaurant, and Hill got out of the carriage. She looked at Mamis with a slightly grave expression, but a confident and elegant smile quickly appeared on her face. She made her way over to the restaurant with a sign that said closed before knocking on the door. After a short while, the door slowly opened. Meg held the door with one hand and smiled at Hill, who was still wearing her red dress, as he said, "You're very punctual, Miss Hill." "Punctuality is a habit of mine. But aren't you going to invite me in, Mr. Meg? I haven't had breakfast yet." Hill also looked at Meg with a smile. "Please come in, Miss Hill, but the restaurant is already closed." Meg stepped aside to let her in. Sheer looked into Mag's eyes with a smile and said, "If Mr. Mag is willing to cook a steak for me in the same way you would treat a friend, then I think that would be a very good start to our collaboration. Since Ms. Hill didn't have breakfast because of my appointment, I will naturally make an exception and make a steak for Ms. Hill. You are the last guest." Meg nodded slightly, and his gaze did not waver in the slightest. Mr. Meg is indeed a qualified businessman. Hill looked at Meg meaningfully and slowly walked into the restaurant. "Compared to Ms. Hill, I'm still a far cry." Meg let go of the door. "Ms. Hill, please take a seat. I'll go get you a glass of water and make the steak." He walked toward the kitchen. "Okay." Hill nodded slightly, and her eyes looked around the restaurant. This was the first time she came to Mamie's. Last time, she was a judge, so she did not enter the restaurant. The restaurant's decor looked very comfortable. It was not extremely luxurious, but the exquisite crystal lights raised the overall style of the restaurant to another level. These murals. Hill's eyes fell on the murals on the wall, and her beautiful eyebrows wrinkled slightly. She looked at the murals on the wall and saw Meg coming out with a glass of water. Her eyebrows relaxed and she smiled. Mr. Meg's ambition is not limited to this small restaurant, right? I even opened an ice cream shop." Mag nodded. Hill was slightly surprised and immediately smiled. "Mr. Meg is indeed an interesting person. Ms. Hill, please make yourself at home." Meg put the glass of water on the table beside him, turned around, and went into the restaurant to make steak for Hill. The steam engine was a big business. Although Hill was only 18 years old, she was already an experienced businessman. Fortunately, Meg was not an inexperienced greenhorn. "Looks like it will be an interesting negotiation." Hill sat down at the table with the glass of water and looked in the direction of the kitchen. It seemed that she had not felt nervous for a long time. She used a white silk handkerchief to wipe the table gently. There was no dust or grease on the silk handkerchief, and her expression became more interesting. "Black pepper steak. Medium well, please try." Not long after, Meg came out with a steak and placed it in front of Hill. The aroma of this red wine is very special." Hill's eyes lit up. Meg stood to the side with his hands behind his back, quietly watching without saying a word. The plate presentation is more exquisite than last night. The color, aroma, and taste are all perfect. Mr. Meg is really serious about this. Hill looked at the steak in front of her and said with a smile. She picked up the knife and fork and gently cut a corner of the steak. Red wine and meat juice overflowed from the silver knife, and the aroma of the red wine became more obvious. It was as if the cork of a wine barrel had been pulled out, and the aroma of the wine was released crazily. Hill's eyes became brighter. She picked up the piece of beef with the fork and put it into her mouth. Chapter 671. Hill had already anticipated the delectable flavor of the steak, but she was also very confident in the wine brewed by her own winery. Not to mention Chaos City, even on the entire Norland continent, there was no winery that dared to claim that their wine was better than the Buffett wineries. Meg had used the best wine from her winery the day before, and the steak was extremely fragrant and delicious. She had thought that Meg would use some low-quality red wine as he didn't have a supplier, so the flavor of the steak would be affected. However, never would she have thought that after biting into the steak, the sweet and mellow red wine and meat juices would flow out together. The rich texture and aroma of the wine immediately intoxicated her. She wasn't a wine drinker, but she had a special fondness for the wine brewed by her own winery. She would drink at least half a glass every night before going to bed. As such, she was well aware of the characteristics of the best red wine. She had to admit that the red wine that Meg had added to the steak was even better than the best wine that she drank every night. The texture was smooth and mellow, without any astringency. Even though most of the texture and flavor had been masked by the steak, she could still sense the delectable flavor of the red wine, making the steak extremely tender and delicious. "Mr. Meg, where did you buy this red wine?" Hill couldn't help but ask Meg after swallowing a mouthful of steak. If a batch of red wine of this quality were to enter the market, it would undoubtedly have a significant impact on the Buffett winery. "Would you believe me if I told you that I brewed this wine myself, Miss Hill?" Meg asked with a smile as he looked at Hill. "I wouldn't believe it if it were someone else, but if it's Mr. Meg, then I'll believe you. After all, you're a prodigy who can cook so well and even take the time to invent a steam engine. It's not that hard to accept that you've brewed some first-rate red wine." Hill looked at Meg with a smile and said, "However, I wonder if I'll have a chance to taste such a wonderful red wine. Red wine is good to go with steak, but it's still morning, so it's not a good time to drink wine." Meg shook his head with a smile. "Besides, this red wine is brewed for steak, so it's not for sale. In terms of quality, it's naturally not as good as Miss Hill's Buffett winery. I can still tell what the quality is. However, Mr. Meg really separates public from private interests. He doesn't even hesitate to reject people." Hill looked at Meg with a hint of bitterness in her eyes. No man had ever rejected her so many times. He even asked her to pay for a meal. "Only by having principles can you survive better, right?" Meg had a smile on his face, but he was cursing in his heart. He wanted to sell it, but the system didn't allow him to. Otherwise, he could make a lot of money just by selling wine. Therefore, the existence of the system was sometimes to increase the difficulty for the host to level up. Otherwise, life would not be so difficult. What a pity. However, if Mr. Meg is willing, I'll be able to buy a bottle of red wine from you at the price of the best wine from the Buffett winery." Hill sighed in a forlorn manner, but she was also quite relieved. The Buffett winery was the Buffett winery's largest business venture aside from the bank, and it had wineries all over the entire continent. It was virtually unrivaled in the high-end red wine market. "If I brew enough wine in the future, I'll be sure to reserve a bottle for you, Miss Hill." Meg nodded with a smile. The best wine from the Buffett winery was quite expensive, with prices starting at 100,000 copper coins. Hill picked up her knife and fork again before continuing to eat her steak. Aside from the difference in the quality of the red wine, even though the beef was still from the same iron hide bowl, there were still some differences in texture. The beef on this occasion tasted better, and it was more springy and tender, as if it had just been sliced from a slaughtered cow. The delicious flavor that danced on the tip of her tongue had completely awakened her sluggish body, and it was as if every single cell in her body was telling her of satisfaction and anticipation. To be able to eat such delicious food so early in the morning was going to make her feel very satisfied for the rest of the day. Hill looked at the empty plate in front of her before turning to Meg with a smile and said, "It's so delicious that I want another helping. If you'd like more, Miss Hill." Meg turned to Hill. "I'll save it for next time. I'll be satisfied with just one helping of such delicious steak." Hill shook her head before gently wiping her lips with a handkerchief. She looked up at Meg, and the smile on her face had already faded. "Mr. Meg, you can talk to me about the steam engine now. Come with me, Miss Hill. I have something to show you." Meg removed his apron and set it aside before making his way toward the door. There was a hint of surprise in Hill's eyes, but she still got up and followed Meg out of the restaurant before entering the room next door. "What's this?" As soon as they entered the room, Hill exclaimed in surprise. In the large room that was about 100 square meters, there was a circular path paved with 2 long metal strips along the periphery of the room. In the corner, there was a long metal machine with small wheels that was very eye-catching. It had rough lines and a black metal shell. The first section of the machine had a smoking pipe that was erected above it, making it look like a quiet, dormant beast. The second section of the machine had 2 seats in front and back. Although it was a little small, it was enough to seat 2 adults. This is a train. It's my first complete practical application of the steam engine. If it can be promoted on a large scale, it can change the way the world travels, Meg said with a smile. The train and track were rushed out in Mumbai over the past 2 days. Although it looked like a child's toy after being assembled, it should not be a problem for product demonstrations. In history, the emergence and application of the steam engine changed the world, and the application of the train was a very important part of it. It completely changed the way humans traveled and lasted for hundreds of years. Compared to the application of the steam engine to some kind of industrial machine, for an ambitious and insightful person like Hill, what Meg wanted to show her was something that she could not resist. Train? Such a lump of iron. Without livestock or magical beasts to pull it, can it really move? I wonder if Mr. Meg can show it to me? Hill's eyes could not hide the surprise in her eyes, but she did not make a quick comment. Of course, Miss Hill can try it yourself, but the steam engine needs some time to start. Meg nodded with a smile and walked toward the steam train. He opened the lid of the boiler and began to fill it with coal. After igniting it, steam flowed into the cylinder and moved the piston. The steam locomotive also trembled slightly. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.